Hey folks, welcome back and may the 4th be with you. So today we're looking at Star Wars Age of the Empire, the role-playing game, the core rulebook, previously published by Fantasy Flight Games, now published by Edge Studio after Asmodee split the role-playing business off from FFG to Edge Studio, which has resulted in these books being frightfully hard to find sometimes. But there are new copies of Edge of the Empire, Age of the Rebellion, and Force and Destiny, the 3 core rulebooks for the system floating around, along with the starter sets, so do go and have a look, and I hope you'll be encouraged to do so after I talk about this game. So I've been playing in a Star Wars FFG campaign now for about 2.5 years. It's getting a little bit harder to schedule sessions lately, but we're nearing the end of our galaxy-spanning campaign arc. It's been a load of fun. I've really come to be an enormous fan of the game system. It does have its wrinkles, particularly once you get to a lot of XP like we have, but it's been a great journey, a lot of cinematic moments, and it does feel extremely Star Wars-y. So Edge of the Empire is the first version of this game system to come out, and it was based on being the sort of down-and-out smugglers and bounty hunters in the Outer Rim. So if you want to live your Mandalorian fantasy, Edge of the Empire is for you. And we can see the Falcon, Chewie, and Han Solo in the front, giving us right away the sort of game that this is trying to be. And if we look at the backside here, we can see the sales blurb. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, it's a time of unrest and opportunity. The Empire struggles to maintain its grip on the galaxy in the midst of civil war. On the edge of the Empire, scoundrels and smugglers, bounty hunters and bandits, explorers and exiles all scramble for a living. So this complete tabletop role-playing game explores the lawless fringes of the Empire, flee from Imperial entanglements, double deal with Hutts and gangsters, and jump to light speed in the fastest hunk of junk in the galaxy. So this game includes a dynamic dice mechanic that goes beyond success and failure to enhance narrative gameplay, fully playable rules for 6 careers, 19 specializations, and 8 species, enabling flexible character creation and development, obligation rules to invest player characters in the story of Edge of the Empire, and finally starship combat, customizable equipment, forced powers, dangerous adversaries, and much, much more. And they're not kidding about the much, much more. This game is huge. All the rule books are 400 pages long in their 3 variations. I'm starting with the Edge of the Empire because this one has the least sort of stuff to deal with. You have obligation as a mechanic to tie you into, some sort of debt or something to move the plot along. In Age of the Rebellion, you have other stuff to worry about, like bases and working with the larger rebellion movement. In Force and Destiny, you've got an enormous amount of additional detail on force powers. So as we go through the other core rule books, I'll introduce those new elements, and you'll find that quite a bit of the core rules remain the same, but each book adds its own spin and presents the Star Wars galaxy with a slightly different light. Different starships and vehicles are included, etc. So, in my opinion, it's worth having all 3 if you're a huge nerd for Star Wars role-playing like I am. Yeah, this is a good place to start if you're new to the whole idea of the FFG system and the weird narrative dice, which you can see here. I think I have enough. They're hard to get these days, so the best way to get them, as I've said in my video about the starter sets, is just buy the starter sets. You get a set of dice in each. I've got 2 sets of starter sets, which has given me all these dice here, and this is more than I'll ever need, really. It wasn't that bad, actually, to collect that stuff, even in the current climate, so if you spend a little time, you'll be able to find the dice you need. So let's dive in. We have some lovely end papers here. We can see the edge of Tatooine, maybe. It looks fairly deserty, with the suns and other planets out in the distance. And we have, of course, Boba Fett's iconic helmet, Mandalorian helmet here. Once again, reinforcing the general vibes of the game. We have, of course, the classic scrolling text. It's a dark time for the galaxy. Striking from their hidden base, the Rebel Alliance has destroyed the evil Galactic Empire's powerful Death Star. Now Imperial forces strike back, throwing the galaxy into war. In the midst of conflict, countless planets suffer under Imperial tyranny. Many flee oppression to build new lives beyond the bounds of civilization. On the edge of the Empire, these renegades struggle to survive and remain free in the midst of ongoing turmoil. And that's you. There's a very happy Yoda giving us an introduction to the system. Much to learn you still have, he says. And we have a little bit of intro fiction here, just for a couple of pages, and then we get into the basics. This is, once again, I'm a new player. What do I do in a role-playing game? The standard section that we have in a lot of core rulebooks. Again, I assume by now you know all this stuff, but there's a handy bit here about if you're a player, where should you start? Jump right in at Chapter 1 playing the game, and then Chapter 2 character creation. GM should do Chapter 1 playing the game, and then move right to Chapter 9, the Game Master, if you want to get started quickly. So that's useful. We have an example of play here, which is helpful, again, for those who are new to the GM and player dynamic. They give you some background about the setting for Edge of the Empire. They mentioned the beginner game, which is a great way to get into the basics of the system and then expand your wings and fly into the full-on Edge of the Empire experience. They mentioned, of course, the background this is set against, which is the Galactic Civil War between the Rebel Alliance and the Imperials. And of course, you're spending a lot of your time in a hut space, big old slug-like creatures who have great influence in the galaxy, typically through criminal enterprise. And then we have the Hidden Black Sun, a secret interstellar crime syndicate operating in every level of galactic society. So there are lots of crime lords. Then you've got your shady shadow ports, black markets, and the game in general is about surviving at the edge of the Empire in the Outer Rim, where you're sort of beyond Imperial reach. Now, this is the Fantasy Flight Games printing. The new Edge Studio printing, as I understand it, is exactly the same, so there's not any like integrated errata or anything. There is a small amount of errata, which you can easily find as a free download on the Edge Studio website. And the game, because of its sort of semi-crunch, semi-narrative stance, is pretty easy to adjust to your personal preferences as well. So here we have a lovely picture of Han Solo shooting a blaster pistol as we get into playing the game. So this is a broad overview in this chapter about how the game works, essentially. And they tell you about what players need. They recommend the Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars Dice app, which no longer exists, but there are other dice apps available. There's a wonderful site called rpgsessions.com, which is built for Star Wars FFG play. You can set up game tables, you can link people's character sheets to that table, and then you can set up any die rolls you need, and they're all generated for you digitally, and your successes, failures, advantages, disadvantages, triumphs, and despairs are counted up without you having to worry about it. That makes the obstacles of the funky dice disappear completely into the background. So highly recommend that, whether you're playing in person or in online spaces. It works really, really well. So we have the standard player character, game master distinction, but here is where we get into new territory. So this game is really designed to have characters and players step up and use dramatic narrative as well as the GM. So the GM is not the only one who can decide what happens in the narrative, and the funky dice are all part of that. And they get right into the core mechanics. So they get divided into two steps. You roll a pool of dice, and after all the factors have been accounted for, if there is at least one success, then you succeed. Then they talk about the different types of dice. So you have positive dice, which come from your skills, your characteristics, an applicable talent or special ability, equipment or gear being used, the use of light side destiny points, tactical or situational advantages, or other advantages as determined by the GM. Negative dice come from the difficulty, so the difficulty dice are included in the dice pool, which is a unique element of the system. An opponent's special abilities, skills, or characteristics, opposing forces at work, inclement weather or environmental effects, the use of dark side destiny points, which give the GM a chance to upgrade the difficulty of a check, tactical or situational disadvantages, or other disadvantages as determined by the GM. They're throwing a lot at you here in the beginning, but they will break it down for you. So here we have the descriptions of the dice themselves. So we have the different categories of positive dice and negative dice, and the force die, as well as the occasional use of percentile die, which you'll need to determine things like critical hits. So you will need to have percentile dice as well. So the positive die, going from least to most powerful, are listed here. So you've got the boost die. So these are dice that have several blank faces. In fact, I can grab one and show you. So this right here is a boost die, a mix of a success and advantage, success, a couple of advantage, but then we have some blank faces as well. 2 blank faces, okay. So the boost die are a way to give out a small advantage to a player or NPC. So if they have the drop on you from shooting from higher ground, for example, maybe they get a boost die or a couple of boost die on trying to shoot you. If you get some advantage on your test, you can generally trade in 2 advantage to give a boost to yourself or to somebody else. So these are benefits that you gain through luck, chance, and advantageous actions taken by the characters, as they say. So they're most often used to reflect the character gaining some sort of benefit or advantage, so it's having ample time to complete the task or having the right equipment. And then you have setback dice on the opposite side. So they do a similar thing, but the setback dice have negative results on them, whereas the boost dice have advantages and success symbols on them. Then we have the ability dice, which are 8-sided. And I'll show you an example of those as well. So here we have the ability dice, basic dice that you set in your dice pool from your skills and abilities. And you can see we have advantage symbols, hit symbols, mixtures, and some blank faces as well. These are the basis of most dice pools rolled by the players. They represent the character's aptitude or skill when attempting a skill check. They possess positive beneficial symbols, and they are opposed by the difficulty dice, which are the purple D8s. Then you have proficiency dice. So these are yellow 12-sided dice. They represent the combination of innate ability and training. They are most often used when a character is attempting a skill check using a skill in which he has trained. Proficiency dice can also be added to a pool by investing a destiny point into an important skill check, so that allows you to upgrade a green into a yellow, essentially. They have a greater chance of success, and they're also the only dice that have the triumph symbol, which is this guy right here. The triumph symbol represents significant narrative advantage, and you can use those for a number of different amazing things, and certain abilities will allow you to spend triumphs to do remarkable stuff like break somebody's lightsaber, for example. So then you have your negative dice. As I already mentioned, you have your setback dice and your difficulty dice. So we'll take a look at those. Setback dice, we have our disadvantages, and we have our anti-successes, and then we have again a couple of blank sides. And for the difficulty dice, again, we have all negative symbols here, so these will cancel out your advantages and successes from your green and yellow dice and boost dice. And typically, the GM will set a difficulty between 1 to 5 and add that many purple dice to the roll. However, if the GM flips a destiny point, or if you're fighting a nemesis character, then you will often have the purple dice get upgraded to red. And these are the worst ones because they have the dreaded despair symbol, which is right here. That represents the opposite of a triumph. Something very inconvenient happens. But what makes the system interesting is because you're rolling a pool of all these dice together, you can have interesting results. Like you might fail the check overall, but get a triumph. So you don't do what you wanted to do, but something else really cool happens. And that's when the system starts to get interesting as far as the narrative results. Challenge dice represent the most extreme adversity and opposition, may be featured in place of difficulty dice during particularly daunting challenges posed by trained, elite, or prepared opponents, your MCs. Challenge dice can be added to a pool by investing a destiny point into important skill checks. They feature primarily negative, obstructive results like threats and failures, but the challenge dice also feature the potent despair result. Then we have our force die. So this is another 12-sided die, which we can see just here. And these guys have different sets of either white or black dots. And black dots represent accumulation of the dark side of the force, and the white dots represent the light side of the force. So when you're trying to use the force, you'll roll a number of force dice equal to your force rating, total up the number of light side points if you're a light side user, and hopefully you have enough to do what you want to do. If you want to use the dark side, you'll have to flip a destiny point, and bad things may happen to you if you continue to do that. If you're a dark side user, you can use the dark side for your abilities, and light side is bad for you. And then your 10-sided die are used for percentile rolls, and these will be used to generate numbers to look up on tables like the critical injury results that you can get. And then we have a table for converting standard dice to task dice. Nobody ever uses that, I think. You either buy the real dice or you use an electronic dice roller. Those are the only real options. Then they talk about dice symbols and results. So your little explosion symbol means a success, and they appear on your positive dice. Advantage indicates an opportunity. So they note that it's possible for a task to fail while generating a number of advantages, and they can also occur alongside successes, which can add positive outcomes to your positive outcome. Threat symbols, which are these guys, the Imperial logo, cancel out the advantage symbol. Likewise, the success symbol is canceled out by the triangular fail symbol. There's a number of ways to use your advantage, so you can spend it to trigger a critical hit if you have enough to activate your weapon's critical qualities. You can recover strain, which is one of your 2 damage tracks, or you can perform additional maneuvers. Then you have your triumph symbol, indicates a significant boon or beneficial outcome. Each triumph symbol provides 2 effects. First, it counts as a success. So that means the success portion of a triumph could be canceled out by a failure, but you still have the triumph part remaining, which is interesting. Secondly, each triumph symbol can be used to trigger incredibly potent effects. 2 common uses are to use a triumph to automatically trigger a critical injury, or to activate a weapon's special quality, effects that usually require multiple advantage symbols to activate. You can also activate other potent effects as well, including those above and beyond triggered by advantage. They could be set by the GM, or they could be defined by the environment, piece of equipment, or a special character ability. Players gain both effects with each triumph symbol. You don't have to choose between it being a success or a triumph, in other words. Triumphs and despairs do not cancel each other out. Then on the negative side, we have failures, which cancel out your successes, threats, which cancel out your advantages and leave you with disadvantage if they outnumber your advantages. Threat effects are usually going to be adjudicated by the GM, include things like maybe your gun jams, or you suffer some strain, stuff like that. Then you have despair, which is a significant bane or detrimental outcome. And like triumph, it has 2 parts, so it's both a failure and a significant negative effect. So that could be running out of ammunition, or weapons being broken. It could be something defined by the environment, or the enemy character might be able to use it to gain a significant tactical advantage over you. And like with triumph, you don't get to choose between the failure or the special effect trigger. You get both at the same time. And yeah, the despair symbol is not canceled by triumph. So you can have triumph and despair in the same roll, and they still will take effect. And they're also cumulative. Each despair will impose a failure, and each can be used to generate its own special effect, and the triumphs are the same. Final category is the force resources. So these are different from the other dice in that they're used to generate force points that you can use to fuel a force power and do things like alter its magnitude, range, or duration depending on what you bought with your character XP on that particular force skill. So setting up your basic dice pool, done by using your 6 characteristics: brawn, agility, intelligence, cunning, willpower, and presence, and combining them with your skills. Your characteristic ratings, this is very important, are set pretty much at the beginning of the game. So while it's a point-buy system, you want to try and buy as much of characteristics as you possibly can at the start, because it's very rare that you can increase them except through certain specific career paths, which we'll get into later. Typical humanoid will have an average characteristic rating of 2. Characteristic rating of 3 or 4 is significantly above average, while 5 or 6 are exceptional. But during character creation, nothing can be higher than 5, and after that, you're capped at 6. When you get into character creation, each playable species has default characteristic profiles that you start with. And then they go into what each of these characteristics represent. I mean, they're all pretty self-explanatory if you played any type of RPG before. Skills and training. So skills represent specific training and hands-on experience and focused knowledge in specific areas, and they are sort of set underneath each of these different characteristics. And each character's career choice also gives you career skills, and over your career, buying extra ranks in your career skills is cheaper than buying ranks in non-career skills in terms of XP, so that's important to remember. And here's a basic difficulty level chart. So a simple check will have no difficulty dice. In my experience, you very rarely need that. An easy check will have 1, average 2, hard 3, daunting 4, formidable 5, and they give you a nice example of each one. So if a formidable would be picking a lock with no comprehensible mechanism, cloning a body, or finding food and shelter on a planet without a breathable atmosphere. Defining task difficulty, they go into here and give some further examples and detail on how that works. All the different levels of task difficulty, and then they show you how to build a basic dice pool. The active character skill training and the skills associated characteristic are equally important when building a dice pool. The way this works is that you compare your ranks of skill training and the linked characteristic. So the higher value between the two determines how many ability dice are added to the skill check's dice pool. For example, if you have a characteristic of 5 and a skill rank of 3, then you use 5 to determine that you get 5 green dice in your pool. So your characteristic is 5, you get 5 green dice. Now let's say you have your 3 ranks of skill. So the smaller number will tell you how many of these ability dice get upgraded into the yellow proficiency dice, which are much more powerful. So in this case, the character's dice pool would be this, which is pretty awesome. But let's say that the character is doing something pretty challenging. Then you would think about the difficulty dice being faced up against that. So that's how you develop your dice pool as a character. It's pretty simple. Higher number is the number of green dice. Lower number of ranks versus characteristic is how many get upgraded to yellow. Then we have your difficulty. So let's say we have our high skill character here. They've got a high characteristic. Maybe they're a Wookiee with a 5 in brawn. Let's say this talented Wookiee is trying to punch down a blast door, and it's pretty tough. So the GM says, well, that's going to be 4 difficulty. That's going to be a daunting task. And not only that, but because there's blaster fire going around you, I'm going to add 2 setbacks to that. This would be your dice pool, assuming that the GM didn't decide to say, flip a destiny point from dark side over to light. So that would mean it would be usable then by the player characters, and turn one of these purples into a red. Boom, there we go. And then this would be the final dice pool. And we'd roll the whole job at once. There we go. And what do we get? We got 2 successes here and 2 advantage and 2 more successes, 4 successes in total. But then we have 1, 2, 3, 4 failures here. So all of those successes get canceled out. We have advantages, so this all gets canceled out, and you're left with 1 disadvantage. So some minor disadvantage happens to poor Chewie when he tries to punch the blast door. Maybe he hurts his hand, takes a couple of strain, or the effort trying to pound on this blast door, he goes and loses some of his stamina. Okay, so this looks challenging. So we have a success and an advantage. We had a nothing on that one. We have 2 successes there, so that's 3 successes. 1 disadvantage, which cancels out that one. Another disadvantage and a failure, so we're down to 2 successes. Another failure, so we're down to 1 success. Another failure, so we're down to 0 successes. Then we have 2 advantages and 1 success here. So these are still valid. These are all canceled out. But then we have a disadvantage, which cancels out that one. 2 disadvantage here, cancels out that last advantage and gives us 1 disadvantage. So we end up with a success and 1 disadvantage. So what would you do in that case? Well, Chewie manages to punch down the blast door, but the noise of it maybe attracts the attention of another guard coming down in the corridor that you just punched into, and that will lead to reinforcements eventually making their way into the fight. So you can see how you get really interesting combinations of results using this dice pool system. They give some nice advice here for the GM as well on adding dice to the pool. So one thing that we learned in our playthroughs of this system over the last couple of years is that adding setbacks and boost is something you should do quite a lot. It just adds more variability and more fun, and it allows players to start thinking a little bit more about, well, what could I do to get a boost in this situation? What could I do to get myself to a better position to succeed? And that will, the possible reward of a boost will spark more creativity. Upgrading and downgrading dice, now that can happen. So that can happen through things like talents. You can downgrade dice, move from a yellow to a green. There's different things that can happen due to talents and horsepowers and equipment and all kinds of stuff. Some dice can be removed from a pool as well. So you'll have talents, for example, that might say when you're using your charm skill or persuade or whatever, you can remove up to 2 setback because you're a particularly charming individual. You're very suave, like Han Solo. And that means when the GM puts some setback into the dice pool, they just get removed right away. And then we get into interpreting the pool, which we kind of talked about a little bit. A good thing here is to remember we've got 3 opposing axes, right? We've got success and failure, the basic success and failure of the task. We have advantages and threats. So this is the kind of side effects of that main task. And we have triumph and despair, which are amped up versions of advantage and threat, which don't cancel each other out. So they can add quite a lot of narrative potency to a roll. Of course, there are other types of checks as well. You have opposed checks. So in this case, you add difficulty dice and the challenge dice to the skill checks dice pool, just like you would on a standard check. However, you build that pool out of the defending character's characteristic and skill. So instead of using the difficulty chart and building a difficulty that way, if I was having Chewie in an arm wrestling contest against another Wookiee, I would look at that Wookiee's brawn and appropriate skill and build the dice pool out of purples and reds instead of greens and yellows, but in the same way that I did for Chewie. And then I would roll that pool and see what the net result is. You can also have competitive checks. Here they use an arm wrestling example. But anyway, in this case, the GM assigns difficulty level for the task, and each character involved makes a skill check based on the difficulty. So you track how many total successes they generate with their respective dice pools, and the most success wins the check. If neither character succeeds, then neither character wins, and you get a draw. If 2 or more characters generate the same number of successes, the check goes to a tiebreaker to see if the draw can be resolved. Advantage and triumph still provide their customary effects. Triumph will count as successes and will break ties in terms of who has the most successes. And they give an example, of course, of all these. Then you have your assisted checks. There are 2 types of assistance. There's skilled assistance and unskilled assistance. So skilled assistance is when the character who's assisting brings something to the table in terms of expertise. When a character with a higher characteristic or skill rating provides assistance, the dice pool may use one PC's characteristic and the other PC's skill rating. So here you're benefiting from the assistance of the other character who might have higher skill ranks than you, for example, which would allow you to upgrade more dice in your pool, or maybe they have a larger characteristic that enlarges your dice pool, and they give an example here of how that works. So unskilled assistance is when the assisting party doesn't have a higher characteristic or skill rating. The GM may add a boost die to the dice pool representing some additional assistance. And there's some restrictions to assistance, so only one character can provide assistance at a time, but situationally the GM might decide more than one can do it, but only one can offer a skilled assistance benefit. All the others will just contribute boost die. And when you're being assisted, the assisting player must be next to you and directly involved in the task. And during structure encounters, meaning combat, when you have initiative order, the assistance maneuver is the way you do this. So it allows an ally to benefit from assistance provided by an engaged ally on his next skill check. So it only lasts until the assisted character's next activation. So other key elements, you have your talents, can have lots of effects on the content and the upgrading or downgrading of dice pools. You have destiny points. On the player side, if you spend light side destiny points, you can use those to upgrade another die in your check, and the GM can use it in the same way to upgrade one of his NPC's dice pools. And each time you use destiny point on the light side, it flips to the dark, and the GM can then use it. The GM uses it, flips back to the light, and then the players can use it. So there's a nice back and forth there. The destiny pool is determined at the beginning of each game by each player rolling one force die, and for each black or white dot that you will get an equivalent number of light or dark side destiny points. Destiny can also be used to help characters get out of harm's way, so you can make an opponent's skill check more challenging. So you can spend light side to upgrade the difficulty on an NPC skill check. And many powerful talents allow characters to spend Destiny points for various effects. To, for example, instantly regain some strain and that sort of stuff. Luck and Deus Ex Machina. So Destiny can also be used to introduce facts and additional content directly into the narrative. The GM already does this by sort of providing the story for you. Players can use the Destiny points to get more contributions. So the player might say, hey, you know, what if there was a set of door controls in this room where we're fighting the stormtroopers, and if we get a good shot off, we could seal the blast door so the reinforcement can't come. They'd say, okay, well, spend a Destiny point and we can make that happen. And it's a great way to keep players involved because, you know, the Destiny point option is always there if somebody has a sudden idea that might make the gameplay more exciting or give a new focus to a combat or just raise the stakes a little bit and end up with more fun. Then they get into obligations. So this is a unique element of Edge of the Empire. You customize your character not only with your characteristics and skills and talents, but by choosing what sort of obligation you have. So before each session, the GM will roll a D100 and compare it to the group's current outstanding obligation. If the roll is greater, then they've stayed off the grid or under the radar enough that it doesn't come back to haunt them. But if they roll under, then the session is impacted by the obligation in some way. So you start to feel the heat. You know, maybe the hut that you owe money to sends people after you, or you might have to make a down payment so you don't get murdered in back alley somewhere. So it's pretty cool, you know, and there's an obvious connection there. The higher the number of the obligation, the less likely it is you roll over it, and the more likely it will come into play. So keeping your obligation low means a lesser chance of it affecting your play during the session. And they talk about experience. So you get your experience at the end of sessions, generally speaking, and you can use those for all kinds of things. So improving characteristics costs 10 times the value of the next highest rating. During character creation, no characteristic can be increased higher than 5. During play, you can't increase them higher than 6. But you can only purchase characteristics with XP during character creation, not at any later time. And as I mentioned, characteristics can only be increased during gameplay by acquiring specific high-tier talents. So you really need to make sure you get the characteristics you want at character creation as much as possible, because depending on your careers, the way the game goes, and how your character develops, you may not get those talents that give you characteristic bonuses. Now with skills, you have 5 ranks of training available during each skill as a maximum, but no skill can be raised higher than 2 during character creation, and you have your career skills versus non-career skills. A career skill costs 5 times the value of the next rank. A non-career skill costs 5 times the value of the next rank plus 5 additional points. So 5 doesn't sound like much, but typically you'll get 10 to 15 XP for a session. So it does end up being important in your decision making. You can also use your points to buy talent from your talent trees, depending on what your career is. Each career has a tree of talent associated with it that you move your way through, and you can also acquire new specializations within your career, and then you can spend XP in that new specialization. So purchasing additional specialization within your career costs 10 times the total number of specializations you would possess with the new one. So if you're getting a second specialization would cost you 20 XP, and then purchasing non-career specializations costs 10 times the total number of specializations plus an additional 10 experience. Then we have your derived attributes. So your wound threshold is how much physical damage you can take before you're knocked out. You can treat them with medicine, but they may take time to recover your wounds. Your starting wounds is determined based on your species and your brawn. Then you have your strain threshold. That's your kind of psychological or mental damage. So you can get strained out by different things and basically pass out. Strain threshold is determined by your race and willpower rate. Then you have your defense, which is how difficult you are to hit in combat situations. You have both a ranged defense and a melee defense. Default value is 0. It's most commonly gained by wearing armor or by using defensive moves in combat, like gaining cover. And typically these will add negative dice to the opponent's roll to hit. Then you have your soak value. That's how much incoming damage you can shrug off before you take real wounds. So the soak value is subtracted from any incoming damage. And the default soak value is equal to your brawn, and increases to a character's brawn rating do increase the soak value, and you can often increase it further by wearing armor or by getting certain talents that'll increase your soak. Now we get into character creation. So they break it down into 10 basic steps. You determine your character concept and background, your starting obligation, your species, your career, your specializations. You then invest your experience points, typically, again, spending as much as you can on your characteristics, first of all. Then you determine your derived attributes based on your species and your characteristics. Then you determine your starting motivations, then your gear and description, and then you choose your starting ship. And that's it. I mean, it sounds like a lot, but it's really pretty quick to understand once you look at the templates and all that sort of stuff. So they talk a little bit about each of these specific points and then point you to the pages where they're expanded on further. So step 1, character backgrounds. They give you some ideas on, you might be a down and out type of person. Maybe you're an outsider in general, so the craziness of the Outer Rim is a place where you feel at home. Maybe you enter life as a miscreant. How did that come about? You ended up in the Outer Rim. Your background will determine what kind of adversaries you might have and what sort of people come after you out here in the lawless fringes of the galaxy. Then you've got your obligation types. So there's a D100 roll you can do, but you could also choose what obligation you have. So it could be an addiction. So you have to keep feeding your addiction to gambling or drugs or antiquing or whatever. And if you don't do it, you start getting 1 to 3 setback dice on all your skill checks. You can have an obligation of betrayal. So either you were the target of a deep and personal betrayal, or you're the one who betrayed others. The target of the betrayal may seek answers, compensation, or revenge. You could have been blackmailed. Maybe there's a bounty on you. You could be a criminal being pursued by the legal system. You could be in debt to somebody nasty like the Hutts or Serica Corporation or whatever. Maybe you stole a starship and they're after you for that. You could be duty bound and you need to fulfill some kind of service like making good on a contract or following some sort of pirate's code. You might have an obligation to your family. You could owe somebody a favor, which could be called in at any time. Maybe you've taken an oath, so that could be like a way of living, like the Jedi Code, or a more personal oath or moral obsession that you personally have. You could have an unhealthy obsession, like with a celebrity, a political movement, or some other facet of society, and you have to pursue that to the detriment of your health and finances. You could have responsibility, which means you have a strong sense of accountability or relationship to a person, place, or thing. It could be a mentor or a desire to care for orphans or taking on the needs of a minority, etc. Finally, you have the option to roll twice on the chart and then divide your starting obligation into 2 different origins. So you have a title and narrative description for each of those and then a numerical value. They give you a number of PCs in the party and the recommended default starting obligation per player. And then at the beginning of the session, as mentioned, the GM will roll to see if anybody's obligation comes into play. You can also start with the same obligation if you want, but if you get an additional starting obligation, you can gain mechanical benefits as well. So, for example, if you take on additional obligation by +5, +10, you can turn that into +5, +10 starting XP or +1,000 or +2,500 starting credits, which is quite helpful. They talk about how to use obligation in play and dealing with obligation check results. So the GM has the option to set thresholds for the group's total obligation that would trigger some kind of negative outcome. An obligation can also be used as a resource, so you can accept additional obligation to get items or accomplish goals, owing favors to people and stuff like that. So once you've got all that obligation sorted out, then you want to select your species, and they've got 8 species in here. In total, the game has well over 100 species represented through the different books, so there's a lot of options. You got your Bothans. So each species, they have their basic ability scores, their wound threshold, strength threshold, starting experience, and a special ability. So Bothans, they have the ability to start with 1 rank in the streetwise skill, and they still may not train it beyond 2, though, during character creation. They also start with 1 rank in the convincing demeanor talent. Then we have droids, and they give some examples of different types of droids you can play. There's a nice droid illustration there for you. There are 5 droid classifications from 1st degree to 5th degree. 5th degree are sort of simplistic droids. Class 4 are equipped with weaponry and designed for security and military operations or even assassination. 3rd degree are humanoid and designed to work directly with organics. 2nd degrees work in engineering and technical fields, and 1st degrees are specialized in physical sciences, maths, and medicine. So your droids, they start with 1s across the board. Starting experience, though, is 175. So you've got more options to build up how your specific droid model has its abilities. You have the special abilities to not need to eat, sleep, or breathe. You're unaffected by toxins or poisons. You have a cybernetic implant cap of 6 instead of their brawn rating. In addition, after selecting their career, you may train 1 rank in 6 of the 8 career skills instead of the usual 4. After selecting their first specialization, a droid player character may train 1 rank in 3 of the 4 specialization skills instead of the usual 2. They're also inorganic, which has some side effects. So they don't benefit from med packs, stim packs, or medicine skill checks. They need repair and mechanics checks to repair damage. They also cannot become force sensitive nor require a force rating by any means. They also can't be affected by mind-altering force powers. Then we've got Gans, a mysterious insectoid species, once again living on the edge of the galaxy. Lesser focus on the physical side, not a great deal of presence, but they do have a nice chunk of willpower there. Their special ability is they have 1 rank in discipline at the start, and there are 2 subspecies. One has lungs and one does not. Those without will need to breathe an ammonia gas mixture, and you need to then carry an ammonia respirator, and oxygen becomes a dangerous atmosphere with rating 8, but you get +10 starting XP. Then you got your humans, good old humans. As with most RPGs, they're sort of middle of the road, average across the board, but they start with 110 XP, a little bit more than the other species, except for droids. They start the game with 1 rank and 2 different non-career skills of their choice. Then we got your Rodians, born to hunt, coming from a hostile world that breeds killer instincts. They have a 3 in agility to start with, which is pretty good. So they're agile from the start, and they also have 1 rank in survival and 1 rank in the expert tracker talent at creation. Transitions are belligerent and tough. So they have a 3 in brawn, only a 1 in agility, but 2 in everything else. They start with high wounds, not so great strain, only 90 XP, but they have 1 rank in perception at character creation, and they also can recover additional wounds from natural rest or recuperation in a bacta tank. And they have claws, so when you do brawl checks to deal damage on an opponent, you deal +1 damage, and you have a critical rating of 3. So you can do critical wounds with your claws. That's pretty cool. Twi'leks. My character is a Twi'lek Jedi Master at this point in the game. Their dance is regarded as one of the galaxy's most graceful and sensual art forms. There you go. They have their native tongue, which includes use of their tentacles as a means of speaking as well. So they start off with only 1 in brawn, 2 in everything else, except for presence where they have 3. They've got a good strain threshold, decent wounds. Special abilities, they have 1 rank in either charm or deception, and when making skill checks, they may remove setbacks imposed due to arid or hot environment conditions. So I found both of those to be reasonably useful, but particularly charm and deception. Charm checks and deception checks come in real handy when you want to try and avoid combat. On the other side of that, you got your Wookiees. These are your Chewbacca types, big and hairy and grumbly. Of course, they start with a 3 in brawn, 2 in everything else, 1 in willpower. They have a high wound threshold, 14 plus brawn, and low strain threshold at 8 plus willpower and only 90 XP. But they begin with 1 rank in brawl right off the bat, and they have the Wookiee Rage ability. So when they suffer any wounds, they deal +1 damage to brawl and melee attacks. When a Wookiee is critically injured, he instead deals +2 damage to brawl and melee attacks. So that's pretty cool. Then we have your career and specializations, and they give you some tips on how to choose which role and specialization you want to go for. And once you choose a specialization, well, how did you get into that line of work? You can add to your backstory to kind of flesh that out. There are nice archetypes here to think about. Do you want to be a strong combatant? Do you want to be a starship specialist? Do you want to be a face for the group, talkative, charismatic character? Do you want to be the knowledgeable dork? Do you want to be the sneaky rogue? Or the support character? And one thing I will say in this game, being a support character is really fun. It's very satisfying to hand out successes like candy, which is what my character does. And then we get into the careers themselves. So we have the Bounty Hunter, where we have assassin droid, the IG-88 style. Bounty Hunters, of course, they are collecting on bounties to make their cash. Their 8 career skills are athletics, brawl, perception, piloting, planetary, piloting space, ranged heavy, ranged weapons, streetwise, and vigilance. And then they have different specializations. So you can be an assassin, a gadgeteer, and survivalist, a master of the wild. And then we see each of these bounty hunter specializations has a talent tree. So we saw these in the starter set, but these are obviously much bigger, and they're divided into active and passive abilities. So passive abilities, grit, gain +1 to your strain threshold, and that's permanent, it's just always there. And each of these talents costs a certain number of XP to buy, and you can then buy any talents it's connected to. So if you want to get all the talents in a tree, you'll have to, wind your way through the different web connections, and at the end, you'll have some pretty cool stuff. So here you get dedication, which gets you +1 to a single characteristic, not bringing it above 6, but that is amazingly awesome. Or you can get Master of Shadows. Once per round, suffer 2 strain to decrease difficulty of your next stealth or skullduggery check by 1. So your high level talents are really good and cost more, 25. Low level talents start at 5, and they get more costly as you go down. And that's the basic idea. And each specialization has its own talent tree in this way. So your Gadgeteer has a lot more passive talents, as we can see, and they include things like having spare clips, having higher wound thresholds, being good with armor, jury rigging stuff, tinkering stuff. All the talents are very thematic to the particular specialization that you've chosen. We see that again with the Survivalist. Again, there's only 3 active talents here: Soft Spot, Natural Outdoorsman, and Heroic Fortitude. The rest are all passive bonuses that stick with you. There's several examples of things that remove and add dice to your pool. This one adds boost die per rank of Hunter to all checks when interacting with beasts or animals, including combat checks. Add +10 to critical injury results against beasts or animals per rank of Hunter. Some talents are like this. You can gain multiple ranks of them. So we have Hunter here, we have Hunter here. The more ranks you get, the talent will become more powerful. So in this case, Hunter, if you get both of these, they will accumulate, and you'll be able to add 2 boost dice to your checks involving beast or animals, and add +20 to critical injury results. And here we see the Expert Tracker talent, which Rodians start with. So some of the starting talents that the different races get, you will need to look up in the appropriate part of the book. It's kind of annoying first time you do it, but you'll get used to it. Now we got the Colonist. So they have their career skills in Charm, Deception, Knowledge, Core Worlds, Knowledge, Education, knowledge, lore, leadership, negotiation, and streetwise. They're not deeply embedded in the world of crime. They're knowledgeable, personable people. They can negotiate. They're good at living on the streets and taking care of themselves, but they're not the specialized fighters of like a bounty hunter or an assassin. And their specializations reflect that. So you have the doctor, who's great at healing, and they add cool knowledge, education, medicine, and resilience to their career skills. Politicos are leaders. They add charm, coercion, deception, and knowledge core worlds. And we have the scholars. They are in the business of having knowledge, and they get knowledge outer rim, knowledge underworld, knowledge xenology, and perception. And they give you some example stories, by the way, of each of the specializations. So Dr. Talent Tree, we get some stuff about performing surgery. Bacta Specialist, which helps characters to regain wounds while in a Bacta tank. Have some active talents, add or reduce damage. You have dodge talents to upgrade the difficulty of combat checks from opponents. You can have stim application and improve stim application to stimulate an ally and increase their characteristic by 1. A supreme stim application where if you get a triumph, you can add an additional +1 to that characteristic, which is pretty amazing. Politicos, so they have a lot of interesting skills as well. You've got Kill with Kindness, so remove 1 setback per rank of Kill with Kindness from all charm and leadership checks. Very useful. Plausible Deniability, remove setbacks from coercion and deception checks. And again, these are multiple rank ones. You can get Toughened, so you get more wound threshold. Inspiring Rhetoric, so each ally affected by it gains boost dice on all skill checks for a number of rounds equal to your ranks in leadership. Do Scathing Tirades to inflict setbacks and strain on your opponents. And you can be a natural charmer to re-roll 1 charm or deception check. Lots of really cool stuff there for talking characters. One thing that's great about this game is the social characters and support characters are both viable and fun, which is not the case in a lot of other games. For the Scholar, you have some really useful talents for gaining knowledge about stuff. So Respected Scholar, downgrade difficulties of checks to interact with Institutes of Learning. You can speak binary. That'll give you a bonus die per rank of speaks binary when interacting with droids. Researcher, which removes setbacks from researching a subject. You can break codes. You can specialize in certain knowledge and spend triumphs to gain additional successes equal to ranks in your knowledge specialization. You can spend a destiny point to ignore effects of critical injuries on intellect or cunning checks until the end of an encounter. Pretty badass. Then we got the Explorer. So they're into astrogation, cool, knowledge lore, knowledge outer rim, knowledge xenology, perception, piloting space, and survival. So you're all about discovering new and exciting and hopefully profitable areas of space. So you're looking for groups, businesses, or organizations in need as well. You need to go out there and find contracts for exploration or for setting up trade, but you need contacts to get those contacts. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. For specializations, you've got the Fringer. So you're part negotiator, part astrogator, and savvy in the ways of the galaxy. You're a jack of all trades, and you get astrogation, coordination, negotiating, and streetwise. Scouts get athletics, medicine, piloting planetary, and survival. So these are focusing on discovering new planets. And you have traders who want to discover new markets, so they gain deception, knowledge of core worlds, knowledge underworld, and negotiation. And so the Fringers, they get some cool passive talents, mostly passive talents in fact. Some useful stuff for combat like Toughened gives you wounds, durable, reduces critical injuries by 10 per rank of durable. Knockdown, you can spend a triumph to knock an opponent prone. But you also have the ability to be street smart, good at galaxy mapping, reduce the difficulty of astrogation checks, all kinds of useful stuff. If you're a scout, then you have, again, some good passive talents. Stalker adds a boost die per rank of Stalker to all stealth and coordination checks. Very handy. You can find shortcuts. You can disorient your enemies. You can be a natural hunter. You can gain grit, have heightened awareness. So allies within short range add a boost to perception or vigilance checks, and engaged allies add 2 boosts. That's very nice. You have Stalker in this tree as well. The Trader talent tree, you are all about finding those markets, right? So you have talents in convincing people, wheeling and dealing. You're a smooth talker, so you can spend triumph to gain additional successes equal to ranks in smooth talker, which is pretty cool. Knowing somebody, so you could reduce the rarity of items that you want to purchase, which is something we'll get to later. You can get black market contact, which are really handy. You can gain natural negotiator talent to have rerolls on cool negotiation checks. This one has dedication, as does the scout, where you can gain +1 to a characteristic. Very useful. We got the hired gun, so you're a gun for hire, a mercenary. You have your career skills in athletics, brawl, discipline, melee, piloting planetary, ranged light weapons, resilience, and vigilance. And you got 3 different specializations. A bodyguard, who's a personal defender, gaining gunnery, perception, piloting planetary, and heavy ranged. Marauder for up close and personal combat. You'll get coercion, melee, resilience, and survival as career skills. And mercenary soldier, you'll get discipline, gunnery, leadership, and ranged heavy. And each of these, of course, have their own talent trees. So a bodyguard, you'll get barrage, which is very useful. Add 1 damage per rank of barrage to 1 hit of successful attack while using ranged heavy or gunnery skills at long or extreme range. Gunnery skills are used for firing from a starship. So hard-headed allows you to remove staggered or disoriented from you. If you pass a daunting discipline check, you can brace for damage, you can take defensive stances, you can sidestep. So there's a lot of defensive maneuvers here that fit with the bodyguard theme. And with the Marauder, you're the up close and personal type. So you have things like Feral Strength. Add 1 damage per rank of Feral Strength to 1 hit of successful attacks made using Brawl or Melee skills. You know, Frenzied attacks. You can have multiple Feral Strengths, multiple Toughens. You can knock people down if you spend a Triumph, which we've seen before. Natural Brawler allows you to reroll 1 Brawl or Melee check. You can also take Enduring to get more Soak, Dedication to get more characteristics, and multiple Frenzied attacks along the way here. There's at least 3 in the tree. And then you have the Mercenary talent tree. So they get some more soldiery stuff like Command, Second Wind, so you can heal strain equal to your rank in Second Wind once per encounter. You can get Point Blank, so you get additional damage when you're firing at close range. You get Confidence to avoid fear. You can get Field Commander, which is an average leadership check. A number of allies equal to presence may immediately suffer 1 strain to perform 1 free maneuver. So you can give out free maneuvers to your friends. How cool is that? Command gives you a boost per rank of command while making leadership checks. Affected targets add a boost to discipline checks for the next 24 hours. You do sniper shots, which are really helpful. You can be a natural marksman. You get improved field commander, so then you can spend a triumph to allow allies to suffer 1 strain to perform a free action instead of a maneuver, so they can attack more than once, which is very cool. You can get true aim, which allows you to spend a maneuver to gain the benefits of aiming and upgrade a combat check once per rank of true aim. Then we've got your Smuggler. So these are your Han Solo types. Coordination, Deception, Knowledge, Underworld, Perception, Piloting Space, Skullduggery, Streetwise, and Vigilance as career skills. 3 specializations, Pilot, Scoundrel, and Thief. Your Pilot gains Astrogation, Gunnery, Piloting Planetary, and Piloting Space. Scoundrel, which is your Han Solo type, will give you Charm, Cool, Deception, and Light range weapons. And your Thief will get Computers, Skullduggery, Stealth, and Vigilance. Computers is useful when you want to hack stuff, of course. And then you have your pilot talent tree. Of course, a lot of these skills have to do with flying a starship. So you've got full throttle to increase a vehicle's top speed by 1 for a number of rounds equal to your cunning. You can be a skilled jockey to remove setbacks from your piloting checks. Let's ride. You can mount or dismount a vehicle or beast or enter a cockpit or weapon station on a vehicle as an incidental action, so like a free action. You're good at galaxy mapping. You can catch people dead to rights to get additional damage based on agility. You can get improved full throttle. Natural pilot. You can reroll any 1 piloting space or gunnery check. Very useful. Supreme full throttle increases speed by 2 instead of 1. You can be a master pilot. Suffer 2 strain to perform any action as a maneuver. Scoundrel talent tree as well. So here you've got talents focused on being a scoundrel, like having black market contacts, being charming and having a convincing demeanor, being a quick draw, so Han shoots first kind of stuff. Rapid reaction, you add an equal number of successes to initiative checks according to your ranks in rapid reaction. It's very useful. So you're really about getting the drop on somebody here and fighting dirty and using your charm as well and your contacts. You can also have hidden storage, which is neat. You can be a natural charmer to reroll charm and deception checks. You can find a soft spot to add damage equal to cunning to 1 hit. Then you have your thief talent tree, so they're based on stealing stuff. So they have their black market contacts as well, but also street smarts. They can bypass security. They can find shortcuts. They can jump up from seated to prone as an incidental. They can be a master of shadows. Take 2 strain to decrease the difficulty of the next stealth or skullduggery check by 1. They can get indistinguishable. So upgrade difficulty of checks to identify the character once per rank of indistinguishable. That's a really good one. And they have dedication as well to increase your characteristics. We got the techies, the technicians. They have skills in astrogation, computers, coordination, discipline, knowledge, outer rim, mechanics, perception, and piloting planetary. So they have 3 specializations. They've got the mechanic, they've got the outlaw, and the slicer. So the mechanic is about making stuff work better. They get brawl, mechanics, piloting space, and skullduggery. The outlaws, so they are specialists that, try and boost things beyond their limits. They get knowledge, education, knowledge, underworld, mechanics, and streetwise. And you got slicers, so these are your hacker types. Extremely valuable people to know and dangerous to cross. They get computers, knowledge, education, knowledge, underworld, and stealth. They're among the most valued professionals in the outer rim, especially to the criminal world. So keep that in mind. Now we've got your mechanic talent tree. So they get the gearhead talent, remove setback per rank of gearhead for mechanical checks, have the credit cost to add mods to attachments. Very useful. So these talents are all about making mechanical things work better through fine tuning, making solid repairs. You've got your gearhead talent with multiple ranks, more solid repairs. You can take a bad motivator action, make a hard mechanics check to cause one targeted device to spontaneously fail. You can make a hard mechanics check using contraption to fashion a device to solve a current problem using just the tools and parts on hand. And you also have hard-headed to protect you from staggering or disoriented conditions. You can reroll mechanical checks with natural tinkerer. So it's really, really useful if you want to build cool stuff. And you got your outlaw. So they have tinkerer talents and speak binary to help them with droids. And they have Utini. Remove setback per rank of Utini from checks to find and scavenge items of gear. Such checks take half the time they normally would as well. They also have multiple ranks of Utini and some defensive moves. They have a utility belt, so you can spend a destiny point to perform a utility belt incidental, produce a previously undocumented item or weapon with restrictions from a tool belt or a satchel. It's a very useful talent, actually, that I haven't mentioned before, but it works really well for the outlaw in particular. They have also jury rigged. They have the inventor here as a final talent. So when constructing new items or modifying attachments, add boost or remove setback per rank of inventor. You can also roll a hard knowledge check with known schematic. If you get success, you get familiarity with the building or ship's design. Then we got your slicers. So these are all about hacking computer systems. So you get code breaker, bypass security, which we've seen before, defensive slicing. So when defending a computer system, add setback per rank of defensive slicing to opponents' checks. You have technical aptitude, natural programmers would allow you to reroll any one computer's astrogation check per session. You've got improved defensive slicing. You upgrade opponent's difficulty once per rank of defensive slicing and replaces the previous benefit. At the end, you can get skilled slicer to spend a triumph to make further computer's checks within the system as maneuvers. A master slicer once per round may take a master slicer incidental to suffer 2 strain and decrease difficulty of all computers or other slicing checks by 1 to a minimum of easy. You also have mental fortress, spend 1 destiny point to ignore effects of critical injuries on intellect or cunning checks till the end of the encounter. Very cool. So those are your careers, and then we have your hot tips on investing experience points. So your species, as you saw, will give you starting experience points, and they advise you, of course, to spend them on improving characteristics. Then you can spend what remains on skill training and talents and acquiring new specialization. But really prioritize the characteristics first, because you will have precious few opportunities to improve them until you get a lot of XP going, and that could be a while. And they give you a nice little table here of the options that you have for spending your experience, the cost, and the limits that apply during character creation. Then you determine your derived attributes given the information in your species profile. Then you determine your motivations, which could be a random motivation like ambition, cause, relationship, or roll once in each of any of the 2 categories. Or you could have a specific ambition like friendship, love, freedom, fame, greed, status, expertise, wanderlust and novelty, power, or religion and spirituality. You can have causes for your motivation, which could be religion, spirituality, the weak or the charity, non-human rights, local politics, overthrowing the empire, being involved in crime, emancipating someone from slavery, droid rights, capitalism, or supporting the empire. So yeah, it could be all different directions for your motivation. And you can also have specific relationships with your place of origin, a pet, a childhood friend, your comrades, sibling or siblings, a mentor, your parents, your extended family and clan, a droid companion, or even a former nemesis. And they talk about how to use motivations in play, calling on them, and making sure that you hold your player characters to account on their motivations. They stick to those during play. The GM will need to look out for that. The player does not have to tell the other players his character's motivations, so they could be at cross purposes, yet still work together. So there's always reason to be a little bit suspicious of your fellow creepazoids on the edge of the galaxy here. Then you get your starting gear and appearances, and don't forget you can take on additional obligations to get more credits. So that's one way to get some more stuff. So you work out your physical description depending on your species and what they like to wear and so forth, and you use your starting cash to buy equipment that makes sense in the tables later in the book. And then you can select your starting ship. The GM will choose one of these 3 ships, or experience groups can select their own, as long as that ship costs no more than 120,000 credits and is approved by the GM. So the YT-1300 light freighter is the Falcon, basically, but not modified. We have the Wayfarer medium transport with ample room for crew passengers and lots of cargo. It's large and less maneuverable, but if you have a dedicated pilot, you might not want this one because it's not that exciting to fly. The Fire Spray system patrol craft is what we see Boba Fett flying and what we see in The Mandalorian. So it's a great choice for smaller groups and for bounty hunting and enforcement. It's got tough armor and powerful drives and has relatively potent weaponry, but it also is bad for moving cargo. So each of these ships has advantages and disadvantages. If you want to move a lot lot of cargo and you're involved in the black market, get the Wayfarer. If you've got a dedicated pilot and you want to make your own way in the galaxy, you get yourself a YT 1300. If you want to be a bounty hunter or enforce nastiness from your hut bosses on somebody, for example, get yourself a fire spray. And here we have Lando Calrissian with the Cloud City of Bespin behind him. And here we talk about skills. So there's the list of skills and the characteristic that they're linked to. So there's not that many skills in the game compared to something like Call of Cthulhu or the old Star Wars D6, which we will talk about at a later date. And they gave descriptions of each of these skills as well. Some skills are classified as general, some are knowledge, and each is tied to a characteristic, and they're described on the page given here. So we won't go through all this. I mean, if you watch Star Wars, you know that astrogation means navigating in hyperspace. Athletics, intuitively obvious. Charm, which is linked to presence, is about your natural charisma with people. Coercion is linked to your willpower, getting people to do what you want. Computers, of course, is useful for slicers or for getting information out of droids and computer systems. Cool is the ability to stay calm and think clearly in the midst of chaos. Coordination, basically your coordination of your body. The GM might have you roll a coordination check if you're walking across a narrow surface or something like that, or crawling on a pipe or whatever. Deception, of course, is deceiving someone, lying to someone. Discipline is a key skill for Jedi, as we'll see later, but this is also to basically your ability to maintain composure and react in an effective manner. So you're overcoming your instincts, your instinctual fear and terror. Discipline checks will help push through and maintain composure. Then you've got your leadership checks. So this is about helping your allies and giving leadership to people that might be helping you out during the course of the game. So you might rally people who have been struck with fear. You can use leadership to sway a crowd, or you can get people back on your side if they've been swayed to the opposition. Mechanics, of course, is about working with mechanical things, repairing things. Medicine is about fixing people, and they give you a medical check difficulty based on if your current wounds are half or less of the wound threshold, it's easy. If the current wounds are more than half the wound threshold, it's average. If the current wounds exceed the wound threshold, it's hard. And if you need to recover a critical injury, the difficulty check is the critical injury severity rating, so it could potentially be very high. And then they have social skill interaction. So, if you're in opposition to someone with a social skill, like if you want to coerce someone, then the opposing skill would be discipline. If it's charm, it'd be cool. If it's negotiation, it'd be negotiation or cool. That's really helpful as well. Negotiation, again, is intuitively obvious. Perception is based on cunning. It's your ability to maintain an awareness of your environment. Piloting planetary is piloting smaller craft that are things like speeders that function within a planet's atmosphere. Piloting space is the skill you use for piloting spacecraft, obviously. Resilience is your ability to take punishment and survive hostile environments. Skullduggery is a broad range of actions like picking pockets and locks, breaking in and out of stuff, sleight of hand, setting traps, just mischievous kind of actions. Stealth is your ability to pass sight unseen to different situations. Streetwise is your ability to understand instinctively the experience of life on the streets. So you use this when you're looking for like black market traders. You have good streetwise, you'd know where to find such people. You'd know how to find shady types if you need them. Survival is your skill at generally just not dying. So things like identifying safe food, potable water, finding shelter, and even handling domesticated animals are covered by survival. Vigilance is about remaining alert even when you need to make an instantaneous decision. In combat situations, unless you've already prepared to begin combat, you use vigilance to calculate your initiative because it measures your kind of reactivity in the moment. So that's what vigilance is for. Your combat skills, you have brawl. This is about punching people in the face and unarmed combat generally. Then you have gunnery, which is your ability to use weapons emplacements that are based on a starship, for example. You have melee, which is your ability to use melee weapons like stun batons or vibro axes. Ranged heavy is going to be your heavy blaster rifles like blaster carbines, sniper rifles. So these will be appropriate for people like bounty hunters and here stormtroopers. Ranged light is using lighter firearms like pistols. You can have a ranged light weapon in each hand, or hold a ranged light weapon in one hand and a melee in the other. Heavy weapons, you can't do such things. Then you have your knowledge skills. These are appropriate enough about how much knowledge you have on a given topic. So core worlds is about how much you know about worlds in the galactic core rather than the outer rim. Education is your general level of understanding, education, basic level of scientific knowledge, for example. Lore will be how much you know about folklore, history, and myths and legends in the galaxy. Outer Rim is your specific knowledge of the chaotic world of the independent Outer Rim, and if you need to find particular places or particular people and things in the Outer Rim, this is the skill that you'll use. Knowledge of the underworld is very useful for certain characters who need to make a lot of black market trades. Your knowledge of xenology is your knowledge of the philosophies and the different cultures and so forth of the many alien species across the galaxy. Again, very useful in the chaos of the Outer Rim. Now we have a description of talents. So we've seen the talent trees already. This is giving us a list of all the talents that are available in this book and where they're explained, whether they're ranked or not, meaning you can get them more than once. And each talent is just explained in a little bit more detail. You can see there's a ton of them. And this is just one book out of 3 core books. I'm not going to go through all of them. It's more fun to discover these yourself in play and as you're working your way through the talent trees. But you'll see they really don't require much explanation. I mean, they're pretty much laid out for you in the talent trees themselves. But this gives you another reference to look through, before you actually make any changes to your character sheet, or if you need just a little bit of a double check that you understand what the talent does. And yeah, there's just absolutely loads of them, as you can see. And then we get to gear and equipment. So this is a pretty interesting part of the game. I didn't expect this for some reason when I started playing FFG Star Wars, but you can modify your gear to a very significant extent. And that's one of the exciting parts of the game, actually. Even with lightsabers, there's tons of customization you can do with different crystals and different mods and different shapes of blades and so forth. Rarity is the way that items are found in the galaxy of Star Wars FFG. So rarity will be ranked on a scale of 0 to 10. Part of whether an item is available or not will depend on the needs of the plot, and if you go to great effort to find a black marketeer and you find them successfully, the GM should be generous, but you can also use it as a kind of random determination of what a given merchant might have. So they give examples of rarity from 0 to 10 and the check that you would have to roll to see whether you can find that item. So for example, a simple one would be a glow rod. A long range comlink would be a rank 1, blaster pistol is a rarity 4, blaster rifle rarity 5, thermal detonator rarity 8, personal stealth field rarity 9. So the higher up you go, the more crazy the stuff gets. There are also rarity modifiers. So depending on where you are, if you're in the Outer Rim, you'll get some additions to that. If you're on an uncivilized world, even more. Inner Rim or in the core, you'll get some benefits just because stuff is more easily moved between the closer packed worlds of the Inner Rim and the core of the galaxy. And then you have your black market stuff where you can find truly exotic and illegal things. If you trade items as well, they give you a method to do that. And then they talk about encumbrance. So these are values that are determined on your character sheet, and living beings generally have an encumbrance value of 5 plus their brawn. So a typical human will have a brawn of 2 and therefore an encumbrance value of 7. So when you're looking at your items that you have, you need to make sure that what you have equipped doesn't exceed your encumbrance value. Otherwise, you'll end up passing your encumbrance threshold, and you'll get 1 setback dice to all agility and brawn rolls for every point of encumbrance over your total. So you don't want that. They also talk about concealing gear. So you do an imposed perception check against the target stealth. Add a boost dice to the searcher for every encumbrance point over 1. So encumbrance, again, makes it harder to hide stuff, which makes sense. You're bristling with weaponry. Something's going to stick out more obviously. Then they talk a bit more in detail about combat skills and the different types of weapons and stuff that can be used with those skills. Then item qualities. So there are different qualities that items can have which have a gameplay mechanical effect. So accurate weapons, for example, you get a boost die to your attack dice pool when you're using the weapon, so it's easier to hit. Auto fire is a more complicated one. You can trigger auto fire by spending 2 advantage if you manage to roll them, and you can trigger it multiple times. And each time you deal an additional hit to the target, and each of these counts as an additional hit, and each hit deals base damage plus a number of uncancelled successes on the check. And that's the way that damage typically works. If you roll to hit, the weapon will have a base damage, and you'll add the number of uncancelled successes on your check to that damage. So if you have auto fire, you get to do that several times potentially, which can be really powerful. And in fact, some people find this item quality too powerful and have found ways to nerf it. But see how it works in your game, as always, before you implement any house rules. Breach means that they can ignore 1 point of armor for every rating of breach. So for example, lightsabers have something ridiculous like breach 10, so most armor they just ignore completely. Weapons with burn inflict damage over time and at the start of each of the target's actions. Victims can stop that damage by rolling around on the ground and making an agility check. Some weapons have blast, so the effect will spread out like a grenade or a warhead. Each character engaged with the original target will suffer damage from the blast zone. And if it's a relatively small room that you're in, then the GM might decide that everybody suffers damage, for example. Trigger blasts on a missed attack by spending 3 advantage. In this case, the original target and every target engaged with the original target suffers damage equal to the blast rating of the weapon. Concussive means that the target will be shell-shocked, so the target is staggered for a number of rounds equal to the weapon's concussive rating on a successful hit. Staggered target can't perform any actions, so that's pretty cool. Cortosis is a passive quality, and that means they're immune to sunder, which is what lightsabers have that can break weapons apart. Armor with cortosis makes the wearer's soak immune to pierce and breach. Cumbersome means the weapon is large and unwieldy, so the character needs a brawn characteristic equal to or greater than the cumbersome rating to wield it efficiently. Otherwise, you increase the difficulty of all skill checks made while using the weapon by 1. Defensive means that you can fend off incoming melee attacks, so you increase your melee defense by the weapon's defensive rating. Deflection increases the wearer's range defense by its deflection rating. Disorient means you can daze an opponent, so if you trigger it, then the target is disoriented for a number of rounds equal to the weapon's disorient rating. Disoriented target adds a setback to all skill checks. And then you have ensnare. An ensnare target will be immobilized for a number of rounds equal to the weapon's ensnare rating. They can attempt a hard athletics check as an action on their turn to break free. Can't perform maneuvers when they are ensnared, but they could do actions. Guided, so these are projectiles that track a target. Difficulty of the attack check is calculated by comparing the weapon's silhouette of 0 to the silhouette of the target. Guided requires 3 advantage to activate unless otherwise specified. Spoofing is a way to protect against that. Knockdown, so when knockdown triggers, the target is knocked prone, and knockdown requires 2 advantage to trigger plus 1 advantage per silhouette beyond 1. Silhouette, by the way, is a measure of size in this game, so humanoid targets are silhouette 0, generally speaking, and starships get high silhouettes like 5 or 7 or whatever. Inaccurate means that you get a setback when you attack with it because it just blasts wherever it wants. Inferior means you have a lackluster weapon that gets an automatic disadvantage on all checks related to its use, and a base damage decreased by 1. Inferior armor has its encumbrance increased by 1 and defense decreased by 1. Ion weapons, so these are used to knock out shields, sensors, and engines. Their damage is dealt to the target as system strain, usually on vehicles. It's still reduced by armor and soak, and droids are also affected by it. They take damage to their strain from ion weapons. Limited ammo, so these are weapons that may make a number of attacks equal to their rating before they must be reloaded, which takes a maneuver to do. Some weapons are linked, so that increases the possibility of a hit. On a successful attack, the weapon deals 1 hit, and you can spend 2 advantage to gain an additional hit. You may do so a number of times equal to the weapon's linked rating. Pierce means that they ignore amount of soak equal to the rating of Pierce. Prepare means that you have to set up the weapon before it's being used, so you need to perform a number of maneuvers equal to the prepare rating before you can attack. Slow firing are large things like turbo lasers or planetary defense cannons. The rating dictates how quickly the weapon can be fired. So if you have a heavy turbo laser with slow firing 2, you've got to wait 2 rounds after it's fired before you can fire it again. Stun will cause strain to the target, and when the stun quality is activated, it inflicts strain equal to the weapon's stun rating. Stun damage, so that means some weapons deal stun damage instead of regular damage. You can also have a stun setting on things like blasters. Sunder, so this is a quality that damages an item. So when activated, the attacker chooses one item openly wielded by the target, like a weapon or shield or something on their belt. That item is damaged 1 step if undamaged, from minor to moderate if already at minor, from moderate to major if already at major, and if it's already at major, then the target is destroyed. Sunder requires 1 advantage to activate. If activated multiple times, each can be applied against the same weapon, potentially taking a weapon from undamaged to destroyed in a single attack. Superior items, that's the opposite of inferior basically, so you get an automatic advantage on all checks, and base damage increased by 1. Armor has its encumbrance reduced by 1, and soak increased by 1. Tractor, so this is a ensnaring attack on a spaceship scale, so they fire with gunnery using all suitable modifiers, and if they hit, the target may not move until its pilot makes a successful piloting check with the difficulty based on the tractor beam's rating. Vicious, when this weapon scores a critical injury or hit, the character adds 10 times the vicious rating to the critical. So if you got vicious 3, you would add plus 30 to your critical hit. And as we shall see, that would be pretty bad. So here we have the overall characteristics that are given for each weapon. Hard points is important because that tells you how many modifications you can add to it, as well as the rarity, of course, how easy it is to find, and the critical rating. So if you hit with the weapon and you have enough advantage that equals the critical rating, then you can roll percentile dice on the critical injury chart to get a critical injury. If you've already inflicted a critical, your next critical roll will get a plus 10, and that stacks. So if you keep causing criticals to an enemy, each critical will be potentially higher and higher until eventually they will get a crit high enough to kill them or put them in mortal danger. And then talk about weapon maintenance and repairing gear, which is pretty simple. Use mechanical checks for that based on the level of damage. And then they give weapon descriptions along with some nice little pictures here. So we've got range weapons. To pick a random example, a light blaster pistol uses the range light skill, does 6 base damage, crit of 3, so 3 advantage. On a roll will let you inflict a critical. Got an encumbrance of 1, a range of medium. It has 3 hard points, so you can do 3 modifications to it. Price of 400 credits, rarity of 4, and it has a stun setting. If we move further down, so the bowcaster, base damage of 10, crit of 3, encumbrance of 5, so it's pretty hefty. 2 hard points, 7 rarity, has cumbersome 3, so you need to be strong like a Wookiee, and has the knockdown capability as well. So that'll give you the basic idea of how the weapons are listed. Melee weapons, there's a notably smaller list. We do have basic lightsabers here with 10 damage, crit of 1, so very easy to crit with these. They have 0 hard points, they're extremely rare, and they have breach 1, sunder, and vicious 2. That's just the basic lightsaber. In Force and Destiny, you can do a hell of a lot more. Then we got descriptions of all these weapons along with their special qualities. We have disruptor rifles and pistols that can disintegrate part or all of their victims' bodies. We've got slug throwing weapons, explosives and flame projectors, missile tubes, frag grenades, thermal detonators, stun grenades, brawling weapons, brass knuckles, shock gloves, and then your melee weapons, your combat knives, gaffy sticks, force pikes, your lightsabers, truncheons, vibro axes, vibro knives, and vibro swords. And then you've got armor. So as I mentioned before, armor adds setbacks equal to the rating of the defense of the armor to the attacker's pool. So that reflects the armor's ability to deflect damage away. And there's different types of armor, from heavy clothing to armored clothing to laminate stormtrooper armor. And we've got some basic types here. So some of them add defense, some of them just add to your soak, some do both. Each of them will have different amounts of encumbrance. So heavy battle armor gives you encumbrance 6, but has a lot of hard points, and it improves your soak and your defense. So again, this is a basic list. Many supplements add hugely to the available equipment. And then we got your basic gear, things like comm links, so you can communicate with people. Hollow messengers for more formal communications with rich folk. We have poisons, if you want to poison people, and they have some examples. So synthetic standard strength neurotoxin, synthetic standard strength anesthetic, synthetic standard strength neuroparalytic, which paralyzes people. They talk about cybernetic replacements and enhancements. So these are useful if you end up with a crit and you lose an arm or a leg or a hand or whatever. And they give you lots of nice examples. So my character has a partly cybernetic brain, which gave me +1 intellect. You can also get cybernetic eyes, limbs, weapons, immunity implants, prosthetic replacements. Then they talk about detection devices. So you got your electrobinoculars, scanner goggles, general purpose scanners, surveillance taggers, then medical equipment like Bacta tanks, med packs, stim packs, synth skin, and synth flesh that can help heal wounds. Your security items like comm jammers, disguise kits, lock breakers, restraining bolts to stop droids, comm scramblers, slicer gear, survival stuff, ration packs, breath masks and respirators for hostile environments, space suits for working in vacuum or low atmosphere, crash survival kits, tents for working outside, thermal cloaks for particularly cold planets like Hoth. Then you've got your basic tools, backpacks, climbing gears, data pads, fusion lanterns, glow rods, jetpacks, if you want to have your Mando fantasies again, toolkits to fix things, utility belts, emergency repair patches, which can be used for quickly repairing tech on the spot. Then we got your black market items. So here you get stuff like spice and other drugs, booster blue, glitter stim, Lasai, Yarok, death sticks, derived from the Balo mushroom, and unique illegal equipment. You can get Outlaw Tech data breakers, Outlaw Tech flesh camouflage set. It's a comprehensive disguise kit, which can actually obscure you to bioscanners, and personal stealth fields. And then they talk about all the customization and mods you can do. So installing mods, there are lots of different types. You have damage mods, weapon quality mods to increase the quality of a weapon, innate talent mods. It grants the user a listed talent when you're wearing that weapon. So if you have a blaster with an embedded talent or quick draw, you can draw it more quickly, as if you had that talent. They can give you skill and characteristic bonuses, and there are some additional mods that don't fall into that specific categories. Weapon attachments, you have things like augmented spin barrels, balanced hilts, blaster actuating modules, so increasing weapon damage by 1 point, but adds a setback to all ranged light checks. So each of these mods will tell you what models can be modified, the base modifier and what it does, options for your mods, and the number of hard points that are required. Remember, each weapon has an HP column that tells you how many hard points it needs. And they give you a nice summary table here for all the different stuff. So automatic recocker for your bowcaster lets you fire more quickly. An accelerator enhancement can add to the damage. Better grips. You can have marksman barrels for longer range. Multi-optic sights, spread barrels to scatter your shots. Serrated edges on your melee weapon to give it vicious qualities. Superior weapons, under-barrel grenade launchers, shortened barrels to make them easier to conceal, under-barrel flamethrowers, telescopic sights, tripod mounts, weapon harnesses. Then you've got attachments for your armor as well, like you can add a cortosis weave or a thermal shield. You can add a heating system for cold worlds, enhance optic suites if you've got a helmet, give you better vigilance and remove setbacks for things like darkness and smoke. You can get strength enhancements, so some augmentation inside your armor to make you stronger or faster. Optical camouflage, you get vacuum sealed armor, so you can operate in the vacuum if you need to. Then we get into conflict and combat, so this is where we understand how the structured gameplay works, as they call it. So first thing you do is determine initiative. Each player will make a simple cool or vigilance check. That will depend on the situation. So you're typically using cool when you're aware of the combat that's about to happen, and you use vigilance if you get attacked by surprise. So you assign your initiative slots after you roll either cool or vigilance, difficulty 1 for each participant. So you note the results that were generated and assign them in order according to number of successes and the number of advantages. These slots are not assigned to specific people. They're just given to PCs or NPCs, which is really nice. So it allows the combat to flow in a more interesting way. If PC1 takes their slot and then the NPC does something terrible that changes your plan, then you can have somebody else jump in better equipped to fix that situation rather than being locked into a specific PC order. So that's a really nice aspect of combat in this game. During the turn, you can do a few different things. You can do your incidentals that basically are your free actions, like speaking to somebody, dropping an item, releasing something you're holding, peeking around a corner, looking behind a person, etc. And then there are the talents that let you do things like draw your weapon as an incidental. So that means you don't need to use a maneuver to draw your weapon. And the basic idea is that on each turn you'll have a maneuver and an action. You get one free maneuver on your turn, but you can perform a second one by voluntarily suffering 2 points of strain, but you can't perform more than 2 maneuvers in a turn. Examples of maneuvers include aiming a weapon, moving one range band closer or farther away from an enemy, opening a door, diving behind cover, standing up. Actions are things like slicing a computer, opening a locked door, firing a weapon, punching or grappling an opponent, issuing orders with leadership check, performing first aid, sneak up on somebody, or climbing a cliff. So these are active things that you're doing rather than movement or setting yourself up for the actions, which are your maneuvers. And they give you specific examples of useful maneuvers like aim. So if you spend your maneuver to aim, you gain a boost on the next combat check. And if you spend 2 consecutive maneuvers aiming, you gain 2 boosts on the combat check. You can also use aim to target a specific item or specific part of the target. So for example, you might want to hit a particular limb to cripple that part of the target or knock a weapon from their hand. You can take a guarded stance, so you add a setback to any combat checks, make it until the end of the turn, but you also gain melee defense 1. You can interact with the environment in various different ways, like moving items, opening doors, taking cover. You can manage your gear with a maneuver like draw a holster, ready or load a weapon, draw something from storage or put it away. You can mount or dismount something. You can move by changing your range increment. You can engage or disengage from an enemy, and you can move within short range. And then you've got your actions. So you can only perform one action in a turn unless you have an ability or a talent that says otherwise. They will typically allow you to perform an action as a maneuver rather than actually giving you an extra action. And there are 5 major types of actions. You can drop prone or stand from prone. Some actions require prepare action. So if you have a heavy weapon that needs 2 turns of preparation before you can fire it, for example, you can exchange your action for an additional maneuver if you want. You can spend an action to activate an ability, like a talent, or you can activate a force power. You can perform a skill check or a combat check. And in a combat check, you will declare your attack and select your target or targets. You'll assemble your dice pool. Melee attack difficulties are always always average. Range attack difficulties depend on the distance. So this game uses range bands. So if you're engaged, it's easy. Short, still easy. Medium, average 2 difficulty. Long is 3. Extreme is 4. Those can be modified by enemy talents or by cover and so forth. Then you look at your pool results and deal damage. So you deal the base damage of the weapon plus 1 for each uncancelled success on the damage. After that, you resolve any advantage and triumphs that you have. You can use that to activate other effects as well. And your triumph can be used to activate a quality that you don't have enough advantage to activate, or you can have it have interesting narrative effects or environmental effects, just whatever is okay with the GM basically. Then after that, you resolve disadvantages and despair if any remain. Most weapons don't have options for spending despair and disadvantage, but that's not always the case. Now they provide you with options on spending both advantage and disadvantage and triumph and despair, but these are not the only things that are possible. It all depends on the type of encounter you have and what the players and GM agree would be viable in the situation. Finally, you then reduce your damage according to soak. You apply that to your wound threshold. If there are any critical injuries that have been suffered, you apply those to the character that suffered them. And then we have an example of applying soak. Some tables here that are useful on spending advantage and triumph in combat. If you want to find a nice summary of the pretty large number of options you have in this system, I'll put a link in the description to the Alexandrians cheat sheet for Force and Destiny. Now, Force and Destiny, like I said, is the most comprehensive version of this rule set. So that sheet will cover you for Edge of the Empire and Age of the Rebellion as well, because it covers every possible table that you need to reference to use the system effectively. There's some nice cheat sheets out there for ideas for using advantage and triumph and despair and all that stuff as well, but the Alexandrian's long cheat sheet is very comprehensive, so I like to have that one loaded up on my PC whenever I'm playing or have a printed copy with me. Then we get into melee and range defenses. So again, it's about adding disadvantage equal to the defense rating to that type of attack. Here's some hot tips on spending disadvantage and despair in combat. Then we've got a discussion of soak, the 5 different range bands from engaged, short to medium to long to extreme, and then you can have planetary scale as well, but that's really dealing with outer space essentially, so you don't need to worry about that face to face really. Here we see a great picture of a Wookiee punching the crap out of a stormtrooper, which was very satisfying, and some talk about combat modifiers. So if you're making range attacks at engaged targets, then that could be more difficult, so you need to make modifiers for that. If you're making range attacks while you're engaged, that'll be more difficult, and they give examples here. So if you're engaged with ranged light, you got +1 difficulty. Engaged with range heavy, you get +2 difficulty. Engaged with gunnery, you may not make gunnery checks when engaged with an opponent. So prone targets, they're easier to hit with melee or brawl checks, and they get a setback when making a melee or brawl check themselves, but they're harder to hit with ranged attacks. So if you're attacking a prone target, you get a setback, regardless of whether you're using ranged light, ranged heavy, or gunnery. 2-weapon combat, you can make a combined check. You denote one weapon as the primary weapon, and then determine what skills and characteristics you would use, and then the secondary weapon, and then determine the target. So you compare the skills that would be used to make an attack with each weapon, and then take the skill that it has lower ranks in, and the characteristic he has lower ranks in, and uses that to make the dice pool. If you succeed, you hit with your primary weapon as normal, and you can spend 2 advantage or triumph to hit with the secondary weapon as well. If both weapons hit, you may spend either advantage or triumph additionally to activate qualities from either weapon. Each hit, of course, deals with base damage +1 per uncancelled success. We've got unarmed combat. Improvised weapons are covered as well, and they can be different things like bottles, rocks, hydro spanner, hollow vid screen, a chair, a shovel, a crate. And then we talk about silhouette here finally. So silhouette 0 is, things like Jawas and small creatures and astromech droids. Silhouette 1 actually is the standard for humans, Wookiees, Rhodians, etc. 2 is larger animals like Dupaks and Banthas. 3 is big creatures like Rancors, Krayt Dragons. Creatures bigger than that would be 4+. Now again, you have a different scale in effect when you're dealing with starship combat. And you have environmental effects. So concealment will add setback dice. So mist, shadow, waist-high grass will add +1. Fog, darkness of the evening or early morning will add +2. Heavy fog, thick and choking smoke, the darkness of night, etc. will add +3. Cover as well will add setback dice to your opponent's range check. Heavier than normal gravity adds up to 3 setback to any brawn-based skills. Lighter than normal adds up to 3 boost to any brawn-based skills. But 0 gravity doesn't add any dice to brawn or agility-based checks because moving in 0G is totally different. It's not harder necessarily, it's just different. And they talk about fighting while swimming, fighting in a vacuum, dealing with fire, acid, and corrosive atmospheres. Falling damage, so again, it's based on range bands, and you suffer strain from falling. And if you fall from an extreme range, you get critical injury at plus 75 or death at GM's discretion. So that's pretty bad. Try not to fall off gigantic buildings in Coruscant or something. Here we have more discussion of wound, strain, and states of health. When you exceed your wound threshold, you're knocked out and incapacitated until such time as your wounds are lowered again. You also suffer an immediate crit. Critically injured means you've taken a critical injury of some sort, and that will have some lasting effect on you until it's dealt with. And if you're incapacitated, you've suffered too many wounds, or you've strained out, and you're unconscious and no longer able to act until you're brought below those thresholds again. Of course, since being incapacitated triggers a critical injury, you can be both incapacitated and critically injured at the same time. And then we have the all-important critical injury chart. Now, if you saw the video on the starter set, you can see this is much, much, much bigger, the critical injury chart. And it goes all the way up to 151 plus, where you are dead. Because you're dealing with a D100 system, obviously you can't roll higher than 100 off the bat. So in order to get up to these red zones, then you can only reach those heights of redness if you have dealt a number of other critical injuries first, so that you build up that crit rating. Or if you have vicious weapons that add to the crit rating. You have 4 different severities of crits, which affect how hard they are to heal as well. So severity 1 crits do things like minor nicks. They slow you down, so it means you can only act during the last PC initiative slot on your turn, or whatever your side is. You can be distracted, you can be off balance and get a setback to your next skill check. Average stuff, things like head ringer, so all your intellect and cunning checks are increased by 1 in difficulty. Scattered senses, you remove all boost die from skill checks until the end of the encounter. That's pretty tough. If you're at hard severity, then you get things like at the brink. You suffer 1 strain each time you do any action. You'll be crippled. One of your limbs is crippled until healed or replaced. You could be maimed, and one of your limbs is permanently lost. All other actions gain a setback die, and you cannot perform any actions that require the use of that limb. You can get a horrific injury and roll 1d10, and one of your characteristics is reduced by 1 until the critical injury is healed. Treat that characteristic as 1 point lower. You can be blinded. You can be knocked out senseless. You can get a gruesome injury, and then you get a permanent reduction of 1. That's down here at daunting. Bleeding out, which is moving towards death, and then the end is nigh. The target will die after the last initiative slot or during the next round. So you have 1 round to basically try and get that person back from the brink of death with medicine checks and med packs and so on. Critical injuries are the way to remove characters from the earth or whatever planet you happen to be on. It is a relatively deadly system, which I like. And we have other ongoing status effects. We talked about staggered, immobilized, disoriented before. Recovery and healing, so natural rest. For each full night's rest, you recover 1 wound. After a week of rest, you can attempt a resilience check to recover from 1 critical injury, to use the severity of the injury as the difficulty. On a failed check, you retain the critical injury, but you still recover a wound. A triumph means you can heal 1 additional critical injury. Medical care, so basically you use the difficulty again of the severity of any injuries, and people can attempt medicine checks on you to try and do that. You can also use back to tanks, so a wounded character recovers 1 wound per 2 hours in a back to tank. An incapacitated character recovers 1 wound per 6 hours, and at the end of each 24-hour period, you can attempt your resilience check to remove a critical injury. So it speeds everything up compared to natural rest and medicine and so forth. Droids can use oil baths, but they're kind of the replacement for back to tanks. They don't restore critical injuries, which are instead done with mechanics checks for droids. Stim packs can automatically recover 5 wounds on the first use, second use 4 wounds, third use 3 wounds, and so on, and it requires a maneuver to inject a stim pack. For a critical injury, a successful medicine check is required based on the injury severity, and stim packs don't do anything. Emergency repair patches are usable on droids only because they can't use stim packs. But again, they don't do anything to crits. You need to use mechanic checks for that. Covering from strain, so at the end of an encounter, you can make a simple discipline or cool check, and each success recovers you 1 strain. A good night's rest generally removes all strain, and some Jedi are rumored to have a technique that allows them to ignore the effects of strain or ease the minds of others to help them recover more quickly. That's very true. See that in Force and Destiny. Recovering from critical injuries, of course, is more difficult. Even if the effect of a critical injury hasn't expired, the critical injury still persists until treated. Even if it's a minor critical, you still have to deal with it, or it will linger. And then we move on to starships and vehicles. Now this, I think, is for me the weak point of the game. Vehicles are just really treated quite simply. It works on a sort of cinematic level, but it's not very exciting or very tactical. And there's a significant risk component here. I mean, you really want to avoid starship combat because it's quite easy to get blown up, and if you get blown up, then everyone dies. So ships just have a few characteristics, basically. They have handling, which is their measure of agility. They have their speed, so the raw speed and how quickly they accelerate. Silhouette is their size. Their defense is representative of their shields. The armor is their soak. Hull trauma is equivalent to their wounds. And then you have system strain, which is equivalent to strain on a person. And then you have their hard points you can use for customization. Handling dictates the number of setbacks or boosts that are added to a player's dice pool when you want to do a maneuver. Speed is an abstraction of how fast you're going. And silhouette rates from 0 to 10. Silhouette 10 is basically the Death Star. Most starfighters and light freighters are ranged sort of 3 to 4 in silhouette. And then they talk about scale here. So, you need to represent the fact that a starship weapon is significantly tougher than anything fired by a person. So a space vessel firing at a person, each point of damage is going to be equivalent to 10 times as much on the personal scale. And if they cause a crit, you go ahead and add plus 50 right away. And the damage inflicted on a ship by a handheld weapon must exceed a starship's armor before the shot can inflict a critical hit. Planetary scale weapons have the blast quality, are particularly effective at decimating ground targets, so watch out for those. Then you got your system strain threshold, so that's like affected by ion weapons and stuff like that, and that can cause complications that screw up your electronics and make the ship non-functional. Hull trauma is what causes your ship to be either crippled or destroyed. Then you got your protection, your silhouette and defense zones. Each ship and vehicle has a chart displaying its default shield settings by defense zones. And for ships with silhouette 4 and lower, this is represented by 2 numbers, one for the forward zone, one for the aft. Silhouette 5 or higher, they get 4 numbers, forward, port, starboard, and aft. So you have shields on and defenses on each of those sides. They talk about vehicle weapons, and here we have a sidebar on standard starship subsystems. So you've got sublight engines, you got your hyperdrive to move at faster than light speed, you got your navigator computer to get you through hyperspace. You got your escape pods and ejection systems, your sensors to check for targets around you and get lock on. You got your comms to communicate between spaceships. You got your transponder, which tells automatically what kind of ship you are. If you want to hide that, you need to get a illegal fake transponder, and it's heavily punished by the Empire if you're discovered, but many ne'er-do-wells do it nonetheless. Then they talk about the shipboard weapons you can have: blaster cannons, auto blasters, ion weapons, laser cannons, including quad lasers and turbo lasers, tractor beams. Then you have your ordnance, which includes concussion missiles and grenades, and photon torpedoes. They do quite a lot of damage, but they also cost money. So a single proton torpedo is 750 credits, so bear that in mind. And there's a little sidebar here on limited ammo and starfighters. Basically, it just says that limited ammo for a person means you have to reload as a maneuver. With a starfighter with limited ammo for proton torpedoes or something, you'd have to go back to a base or a carrier to reload. You can't reload in mid-combat or in mid-fight. You need to go back to somewhere where you can stop and have missiles loaded back onto your craft. Then we have a summary table of starship and vehicle weapons. So we have their range, damage, crit rating, and qualities, and the basic overview of starship and vehicle combat, which is very much the same as personal combat. You determine your initiative, assign the slots. Participants take turns according to whether it's an NPC slot or PC slot that's up next. Then you work out the effects of the combat. The round will end, and then go back to step 1 again until the encounter has been resolved. Either the ship's been blown up or somebody's been run away. Small craft combat is relatively straightforward. Capital ship combat is more complex somewhat in that you have additional crew members aboard that can use actions and starship maneuvers to man weapons, operate sensors, move about the ship, and do things alongside the pilot who is doing their thing. So each ship is likely to have hundreds or thousands of crew, and GMs and players should not track all of their initiative slots and actions during combat. Instead, only focus on those individuals who are actually doing things pertinent to the encounter. Yeah, good advice. Then they talk about maneuvers, which are a bit different. So you have accelerate, decelerate, fly, and drive. And they talked about the different speeds that you can get up to. You can take evasive maneuvers to try and avoid incoming fire. You can use stay on target. So you need a certain speed. Note there's also silhouette restrictions on some of these. So evasive maneuvers is silhouette 4 or less. Stay on target, punch it are also like that. The others are any capital ships can do them. Stay on target means that all combat checks from the vehicle executing this maneuver upgrade the ability dice in their pool once. Unfortunately, the pilot blocks out all other threats as an easier target for an opponent. So if somebody's targeting you, they can upgrade their dice once. You got punch it, so you can go immediately to maximum speed rating from any other speed, but you do suffer some system strain. Then you have your angle deflector shield, so you can reassign 1 point of defense from one defense zone to another. So you can move from the forward shield to the rear if you're in a fighter, for example. Then you got your actions, you can do damage control, so you try to mitigate some of the stress caused to a vehicle system. So you make a mechanics check, you recover 1 point of system strain per success, and you can do it as many times as needed to reduce the system strain to 0. But each character can only do 1 action per turn, of course. A skilled mechanic can also repair some of the damage, so you can do a mechanics check to reduce hull trauma, 1 per success. Then you've also got gain the advantage maneuvers, so this is useful in a dogfight between smaller ships again. Speed advantage, so depending on the speed of the initiating craft doing the maneuver to gain the advantage, it gives you different difficulty to roll. And then you can perform a combat check with vehicle weapons, of course, and that works the same way as with people, except there's an added silhouette component. So you declare your attack, select your targets, assemble your dice pool, and then you compare silhouette. So if the firing vessel has the same silhouette as the target, or is one larger or smaller, then it's average. If the firing vessel has silhouette 2 or more points smaller than the target, it's easy. If the firing vessel has a silhouette 2 points larger, it's hard. Firing vessel has a silhouette 3 points larger, it's daunting. And silhouette 4 or more points larger is formidable. Smaller craft are harder to hit, basically, which makes sense. Then you roll your pool, deal damage, resolve advantage and triumph, resolve disadvantage and despair. And then we have some example point spends for advantage and triumph and disadvantage and despair in starship and vehicle combat. And then we have some additional actions you can take, the skills you need, and the results that can happen. So you have plotting a course in hyperspace, co-pilot, which downgrades the difficulty of the pilot's next piloting check by 1. You can jam signals, you can boost your shields, you can try and do manual repairs, you can use fire discipline. So if you are successful in a hard leadership or discipline check, the next gunner will gain a boost die to their check. And every 2 successes you get grants this to an additional crew member. You can also spend 3 advantage to allow every hit from shipboard weapons to inflict 1 system strain on the target as well as regular damage until the beginning of his next turn. You can scan the enemy. You spend 2 advantage. You can learn their current system strain and hull trauma levels. You can slice their systems. You can reduce the defense of 1 zone for 1 round per success. You can use a triumph to disable a weapon system for 1 round, and 2 advantage can inflict 1 system strain on the target. And spoofing missiles, so you can spoof the guidance of opposing ordnance, and you upgrade the difficulty of the guided weapons difficulty checks by 1, plus an additional upgrade for every additional 2 advantages at the start of the crew member's next turn. So there's some cool stuff you can do in space combat. And then you talk about planetary scale range bands. It's all abstract. You don't really need to worry about it too much. But in space, extreme range is likewise probably beyond the range of almost all starship weapons. So that's something to really worry about. It's at long range, starting to get into range of some fire, but medium range and short range is really where things start to heat up. Then you have stellar phenomena and terrain and their effects. So you can have navigational hazards like scattered trees or dangerous terrain if you're on a planet, risky terrain like canyons and so forth, and each adds more setbacks. Celestial hazards will add to your difficulty of piloting in space. And then we got taking damage. So you have your hull trauma, which is essentially your wounds. So when your hull trauma you've taken exceeds your hull trauma threshold, then you immediately take a critical hit. Additionally, the ship systems shut down, you revert to emergency power, and you're effectively drifting uselessly in space. You can be crazy and then try a hard mechanics check to bring the ship back to some semblance of life. Reduce the hull trauma to 1 below the threshold, but suffer speed being reduced to 1, maneuverability reduced to -3, and all weapon systems inoperable. So basically you can just limp away from the battle. So when you exceed the system strain threshold, the ship's speed drops to 0, and the majority of its systems cease operating. So you can't move, can't use your weapons, your defense drops to 0. And that can be pretty problematic if somebody is putting you under heavy fire. And then you have your critical hits, of course. So critical hits can be triggered in the normal way by spending advantages or triumphs on the weapon that's fired. They can be triggered by going over the hull trauma threshold. The most devastating are component critical hits, which either temporarily or permanently damage critical systems on a target vessel and can lead to lots of complications. We talk about repairing hull trauma, and here's your critical hit table. So easy ones, you get jostled, you can lose power to shields, you can be knocked off course, you can get an opponent hit offline, and here's your small ship components and your large ship components, landing gear, sensors, sublight drive, hyperdrive, etc. Average, you get into more serious stuff like shields failing, navicom failures, power fluctuations. Hard severity, we get shields down, engines damaged, engines down completely, a major systems failure at the upper end. At daunting, you get a major hull breach, breach, which is a huge problem. You can be destabilized, so your whole structural integrity is seriously damaged. Reduce the ship or vehicle's hull trauma threshold and system strain threshold to half their original values. You get a fire that rages throughout the ship. You can get the ship to start breaking up, or you can just be vaporized at 154 plus. Everybody aboard is dead in that circumstance, so try to avoid that. Info on interstellar travel. Sublight travel is really straightforward. I mean, this is a science fantasy game. There's not a lot of realism here. I mean, going from a planet's orbit to a safe hyperspace jump distance is 5 to 15 minutes. From a surface to a moon is 30 to 90 minutes. One planet to another in the same system is 6 to 12 hours. And from the center of a star system to its furthest limits is 12 to 72 hours. So huge amount of room there for the speed of plot, essentially. Astrogation checks you need to use hyperspace travel, and you'll get modifiers to your difficulty. If you have things like a damaged navigomputer, if you're under duress, you add 1 difficulty. If you're heavily damaged, or if you have outdated or corrupt or counterfeit navigation charts. And they talk about hyperspace travel. So if you're within the sector, it's 10 to 24 hours. Within a region, 10 to 72 hours. Between regions of the galaxy, 3 days to 1 week. And across the galaxies is only 1 to 3 weeks. Space travel is real quick in Star Wars. Then we got some vehicle profiles. So you can see, it's really basic. Just a few stats for each one, really. Sort of quick to resolve, but there's always that kind of lurking sense of dread for me that, it's going to explode and kill the whole party, and this cool space combat becomes like the worst thing ever. So we got airspeeders, cloud cars, T-16 skyhoppers, once piloted by Luke Skywalker, Incom T-47 airspeeders, and then we got land speeders, military speeder bikes, a Flare S swoop bike, A5 heavy speeder truck, the X-34 land speeder, and we have our wheeled and tracked vehicles. Here's a Jawa thingy. Carillion Minor Corporation digger crawler. Personnel carriers, we've got walkers like the all-terrain personal transport and the AT-EST exploration and survey walker. Notice we don't have the Imperial's AT-ST or AT-AT. This is the Outer Rim after all, so it's beyond the Imperial's reach. Then we got some starship profiles. So we have the cloak shape fighter. Each of the starships has a bit more detail because you've got to have a bunch of weapons and stuff on there. And you also got to think about silhouette and all that sort of stuff becomes more important. You end up with a lot of mixed battles between ships with different silhouettes. Get some customizations as well. Then you got your fire spray patrol craft, which is one of your potential starting ships. It's got forward mounted auto blasters, light tractor beam, 4 hardpoints. We've got the JAM 5000 Jumpmaster Long Range Scout. We've got the Lambda class shuttle. It's a classic here. This is the Long Range Scout. We've got the old TIE Starfighter right here, which doesn't have any shields and just has front-mounted linked laser cannons. We've got the A4 and Y-Wing attack starfighter. So here we have these guys. The Y-Wings are really customizable, so they're still popular even despite their age. Z95 Headhunters were kind of a precursor to the X-Wing. The Skip Ray blast boat we see here. It's a pre-Clone Wars design, so it goes back a ways. Triple forward-mounted light ion cannons, which is handy for disabling targets. We got freighters and transports as well, if you're into the more mercantile side of things. The Action 6 bulk transport right here. The Citadel class light freighter. GR-75 medium transport. And then we have the Sorosub Luxury 3000 space yacht. Space Master medium transport. The Starwind pleasure yacht. Wayfarer class medium freighter. The YT-1300 light freighter, that's our Millennium Falcon base model. The YT-2400, an update of that design, and it has some slightly increased numbers, as you can see. Better maneuverability, hit threshold, and stuff like that. We've got the Star Galleon armed transport as well. And then we got our capital ships, the CR-90 Corvette. Got a silhouette of 5, so once we get about 4, we're into capital ship territory. The DP-20 gunship, Marauder class assault corvette. The Nebulon B escort frigate. So not much in the way of capital ships. Again, this Edge of the Empire game is more focused on small craft and sort of street level, if you like, dealing with bounty hunters and gamblers and huts and criminals. We're not dealing with epic space battles between the rebels and the Empire. That's what Age of the Rebellion is for, which we'll cover next time. Then we have starship and vehicle modifications. There's tons of stuff here again as well. Better targeting, electronic countermeasures, better armor, better control circuits, better shields, smuggling compartments like you have on the Millennium Falcon, better hyperdrive generators, high output ion turbines for your sublight speed, upgraded weapons. Then we get into the Force. Now, there's some basic stuff about Jedi and the dark side here. In the Edge of the Empire, you can have Force-sensitive characters. You'll get a Force rating of 1, potentially more, but typically you'll start with 1. Most characters, though, have a Force rating of 0, so they're not affected by the Force rules at all. But they have a career here for the Force-sensitive exile living in the Outer Rim. And here you have these powers now introduced. They can be active or passive, and they have a little jaggedy thing. A jaggedy thing means that only Force-sensitives can use these. You'll have some special talents that non-Force-sensitives can't use. So you can do things like have uncanny senses, you can get perception and discipline as career skills, you can have overwhelming emotions to add to charm and coercion or deception checks. You can sense danger, remove 2 step back from any one check. You can sense emotions, you can get a better sense of balance, and at the end, you can gain +1 to your Force rating, which is pretty awesome. And they talk about Force talents and Force powers. So activating powers requires rolling the Force dice. Of course, if you want to use the dark side, then you'll need to flip a destiny point to do that. They talk about using ongoing effects, which is pretty easy. Basically, your Force rating tells you how many Force dice you can roll for a Force check. And if you say have a Force rating of 2 and you use a power that says you can commit 1 Force die to keep the effect ongoing, then you move that die to the side, and you can't use it in rolls anymore because it's being spent keeping that power going. So that leaves you with 1 Force die in that example to keep using. And then we talk about some different powers and the upgrades you can get. So strength will amplify the basic effect of the power, making it more potent. Magnitude increases the number of targets affected by it. Duration increases how long it's available for. Range increases the distance you can use the Force power over. And control add new effects or modify existing effects. So here we have the Force power tree of sense. So the basic power is that you can spend light side to sense all living things within short range, including sentient and non-sentient beings. And you can spend light side to sense the current emotional state of one living target. But what's really cool is when you start spending down these talent trees, you unlock more abilities. So you can commit a Force die with control, and once per round, when a target attacks the Force user, he upgrades the difficulty of the pool once. And you can add duration to have that be triggered an additional time. You can add strength to upgrade the pool twice. And then you can upgrade the range, the magnitude, and you can spend a Force die with this control power to sense the current thoughts of one living target with whom he is engaged. So it's a really, really useful power because you can sense the emotional state or even the thoughts of somebody else. And during combat, you can use it to sense what's coming and make it harder for the enemy to hit you by upgrading their difficulty on their checks, which is awesome. Influence is a really, really great power. In fact, it can be ridiculously good depending on the type of game you're playing. This is about influencing the emotional or mental state of another person. So there's a special rule in this case. So if you're using dark side points, that's the only way you can generate negative emotions. If you spend light side, you can only create positive emotions like peace, tranquility, and friendliness. Other emotions like confusion can be generated with either. The character may spend 1 light side to stress the mind of one living target and give them 1 strength. But then you have control upgrades that do more stuff. So you can make an opposed discipline versus discipline check combined with an influence power check. If you spend light side and succeed on the check, you can force the target to adopt an emotional state or believe something untrue, lasting for 1 round or 5 minutes. Here you can make a coercion, charm, deception, leadership, or negotiation check, roll an influence check as part of your dice pool, and then spend your Force die to gain successes or advantage on the check, which is just amazing. The more you build up this, you just become incredibly effective at controlling the outlook of other characters, and that can be incredibly powerful. And with stuff that you can do as a full Jedi in Force and Destiny, you can get real wild with this. Then we have the move power. As you expect, this is telekinesis. At the basic level, you can spend 1 pip to move 1 object of silhouette 0 that is within short range up to its maximum range. The default maximum range is short range. So with the basic power, you can move a thing within short range. But then you can spend magnitude to affect more targets, spend strength to increase the silhouette that's affected. And there are 4 of those, right? So you can go up to silhouette 4, very large creature or a starfighter. You can increase the range over which the effect works. Use control to make a discipline check with a move power check and deal damage equal to 10 times the silhouette of the target. So this is when you hurl something into an obstruction. You can also pull objects out of secure mountings or out of an opponent's grasp with this control power, and sucking a weapon out of an enemy's hand with your brain is always cool. And very Star Warsy. Now we get into the Game Master chapters. I won't spend too much time here. I will say that they give you some really great tips here on learning the game, getting your first session together, how to manage the party and try to keep things sort of on track, how to manage things like disputes and when the game goes off the rails, what should you do. It's really good general advice as well. They don't seem to assume that, you've been a GM before. They give you the basic ideas right away. And they give you additional tips on interpreting dice pools and the use of boost and setback dice, which is very often up to the GM, and how to use strain to represent psychological damage. And then they give you some examples of dice pool evaluations. Just something you need to practice if you're doing it physically. But again, if you're using a dice roller, of which there are many, then it just takes care of itself. It's instantaneous. Using fear as well, and how fear checks work. So different states of fear will give you different levels of panic. So fighting Darth Vader, right, you would get like a formidable check, and you would upgrade it 3 times. So you'd have 3 red and 2 purple. So we're talking about some serious stuff. Effects of fear, they give you some suggested effects. Like the minimum would be, you add a setback to each action you take during the encounter. You'd also suffer a number of strain equal to the number of threat on the roll. With a despair, you could get incredibly frightened and increase the difficulty of all checks until the end of the encounter by 1. Successes would be the opposite, so you can triumph over the fear. You could even get an advantage. Enemy's effort at intimidation actually makes you more enticed and excited to fight. Then they talk about managing your downtime, taking feedback and improving, and how to use the systems presented here to create adventures, which is really cool. Things like adventure hooks, whether you should have recurring characters, what you should do with stock NPCs and famous characters, ways of creating memorable NPCs, and the basics of a good story and plot structure, which a lot of people don't know, really, and how to direct an individual session. And then obligation, of course, is part of the game, so you want to make sure that you're prepared for that to kick in certain thresholds and do different things. They talk about how to do that, how to manage obligation as resources. So players can use obligations to sort of swap favors for boons, but if they overdo it, it should come and bite them in the ass. And settling those obligations, managing player motivations and getting into the story, setting up a base of operations and having resources, making sure that your group has somewhere to kind of rest and recuperate, which could be your starship. Using destiny points effectively. That's a really good one specific to the system. And destiny points are good as a narrative aid, but they remind you to use common sense. If you're adding something to the scene with a destiny point, it should be reasonable based on what's happening, and it should be something that makes basic sense. And they talk about running a full campaign, linear versus non-linear campaigns, different ways you can end up railroading characters or not, and how to avoid boring battles. Make sure that battles are about something. There's a purpose to engaging in combat. Making up adventures that are inspired by your character's obligations and motivations. Planning out rewards. Make sure that players feel like continuing is worth it. They get XP, they get bonuses, they get cool items or item mods. And alternate optional rules, so different ways of making passive checks, alternate rules for initiative, 1-check combat resolution. If you just can't be bothered, you can do a 1-roll combat system. We never use that, I don't think, in our game, but it is there. Then we have some info on the Star Wars galaxy. So I talk about the major galactic hyperlanes and how people get around. We have a lovely map here of the galaxy itself. So the outer rim you can see is really out on the edge here. We have the mid-rim, expansion region, inner rim colonies, then the core, and then we get to Coruscant, which is of course the capital. And we have some key locations out amongst the outer edge of the galaxy. So Mon Calamari is way out here, for example. We have Toydaria, that's Watto from the prequels. Bothan space, we've got the Arcana sector out here. Wild space, we've got Dagobah out here, Mustafar, various locations like Hoth and Bespin that you'd recognize from the films are here. This kind of stuff is what gets you into the lore. And there's 5 major trade routes. Then we talk about the different parts of the galaxy, so the deep core, notable locations that you have there, the core worlds, and how they sort of dominate galactic politics, notable locations there, Alderaan, RIP, Coruscant, the Imperial Government Center, places like Kuat, then we have the colonies outside of the core, we got places like Balmora, Deveron, Gorman, then we have the Inner Rim, where there's a little bit more turmoil going on. We've got locations like Denon, Onderon, Thyphira. We have the expansion region, which is an economic flux. Places like Gathar, Kinyen, Tirfon. The mid-rim, so you have places like Kentares, Faline, Iridonia, Kashyyyk, which is the Wookiee home planet, Ethor, which is the home of the Ethoran species, which look like walking hammerhead sharks. You got the outer rims and the outer reaches. Bespin, Dantooine, Endor, Gand, Geonosis, Kessel, Mon Calamari, Mustafar, Solust, Tatooine, Utapau, Yavin. I mean, so many places important to the films are in the Outer Rim. It's a good place to set a game in general. Then you got Wild Space and the Unknown Region. So Wild Space is sort of the minimally explored areas at the edges of known space. It can be hard just to get there because there's, no clear hyperspace lanes and finding maps is difficult. The Unknown Regions is basically beyond the known worlds entirely. The Republic gradually started sort of exploring it, but it's still a source of outrageous threats and mysteries. So the modern day boundaries of the Unknown Regions were established with the discovery of a great tangle of hyperspace anomalies, which basically forms a barrier that splits the galaxy virtually in two. So getting into the Unknown Regions is really, really difficult, but not impossible. And they talk a little bit about the history of exploration of the Unknown Regions, some notable locations out there. Camino. So that's where the clone armies were built. We have Hutt Space, which is a great place to set adventures, and there's a fantastic expansion book on Hutt Space for Edge of the Empire, by the way. Notable locations, we've got Bunta, Cleva, Nal Hutta, which is the Hutt's adopted homeworld, Nar Shaddaa, the Smuggler's Moon, Toydaria, the homeworld of the owner of Anakin Skywalker. Got the corporate sector, so these are worlds that are under corporate control. The Empire is a fascist state, so a lot of corporate control is in cooperation with the Empire. And there's other notable places like Bothan Space, the Hapes Cluster, Shadowports, Mando Space, Slice, the Tion Cluster. We've got then planet profiles. These are really cool. So give you a good chunk of detail on specifically important planets. Corellia, which is where, the Millennium Falcon is built. The Cloud City, Bespin, Fondor, Kessel, Ord Mantell, Nal Hutta, Ryloth, Tatooine. Then we get into law and society. So they talk about the way order is enforced in the Empire, the Imperial Security Bureau, Grand Moffs and Moffs, Imperial Intelligence, the military, the Navy and their Star Destroyers, the Army, the Stormtroopers, which are actually separate from the Army, the Imperial Stormtrooper Corps, dealing with the Empire, and then we have the Alliance to Restore the Republic, which is the Rebellion. We have Allied Commands, Alliance Intelligence, the Rebel Alliance Military, and they have different sector commands. We have Black Sun, who are the far-reaching criminal syndicate with activities all around the place. They're big into smuggling and transport of illegal items and activities. Then we have the Hutts, the big slug boys, and they're into all kinds of crime. So they don't like to take sides. It might help out rebels for the right cost or the Imperials for the right cost. They don't really care. They just want to make money, and they love to take revenge and control things. If somebody wrongs a Hutt, then that diminishes their power in their face, kind of, and they need to go and take care of that person with immediate effect. We got the Corporate Sector Authority as well, the Zan Consortium, another criminal syndicate, 10 Lost Syndicate, the Bounty Hunters Guild, and they talked about the various houses within the Bounty Hunters Guild. Pirates, of course, that haunt some of the space lanes. Law and Order in the Galaxy and how it's enforced by the Imperial Charter. Criminal Justice, the Procurator of Justice, the Imperial Office of Criminal Investigations. Doing business in the Empire is governed by the Imperial Revenue Codes, the Bureau of Ships and Services, or BOSS, great acronym, the Imperial Space Ministry, and then you got Sector, Zone, and Planetary Law. So, as with any space setting, you've got to deal with the sheer scale of everything, right? You have galactic level law, but then you have also sector level, system level, and planetary level, and there'll be differences between those. And we have places outside the law. Now we've got adversaries, people to fight. You've got minions, so these are your mooks. So they don't suffer strain. Anything would inflict strain gives them a wound instead. They don't possess ranks and skills. They can fight in a group, and there's some rules about that, which I won't get into. And they're killed by critical injuries immediately. And then we have rivals. They're more dangerous. They possess skills, and they operate individually rather than in groups, but they generally don't have more than 2 ranks in any skill. Nemeses are equivalent to player characters. They may even be more powerful because you'll have a group of characters fighting a single person potentially. They'll often have talents, high characteristics and skills, and really good equipment. They suffer strain and wounds normally and don't have any special rules governing their operation. So we have an adversary list then. So we got generic stuff like arms dealers, barrel enforcers, assassins who are a nemesis, so they're a full character, forgers, info chants, loan shark, which is a nemesis, pirate crew, the minions, pirate captain would be the nemesis out of the crew, slavers are rivals, shipjackers, slicers, smuggler barons, smugglers, street toughs, Celestin pilot for hire, swoop gangers, Twi'lek black marketeers, comm operators, custom operators, Mon Calamari mechanics, spaceport security details, security officers, spaceport admin, who are nemesis, bounty hunters, so apprentice hunters are minions, journeyman hunters are rivals, and master hunters are nemesis. Forces of law and order, so corporate sector police are minions. Security captains for the corporates are rivals. Corporate authority vice preps are nemesis. The Emperor's Hand are nemesis. The Imperial Intelligence are rivals. Imperial Moth would be a nemesis. Imperial Naval Troopers are minions. Imperial Naval Officers are rivals. Imperial Stormtroopers are minions. Imperial Stormtrooper Sergeants are rivals. Military Starfighter Pilots are minions. Planetary Defense Force Troopers are minions. Planetary Governors would be a nemesis. Sector Rangers are rivals. Patrons and clients, so we've got Black Sun Vigo, a Hutt Crime Lord. They're both nemesis. The Hutts have pretty large stats here. They've got 6 for brawn, 6 cunning, 5 willpower, 4 intellect. So they're clever, they're big, and they're tough. And they've got a number of talents as well. Skills, talents, abilities, and equipment. But they generally don't have equipment, it says, but they will wield weapons like a vibro axe or large bore blaster pistols. They also have corrupt bureaucrats, rebel alliance liaisons, rivals. Core worlds, you might have arrogant rich heirs, philanthropic senators, wealthy nobles in the rival category. Then you've got droids, and a subtable here with droid prices and their rarity levels. Battle droids, assassin droids, which are really tough, astromech droids, maintenance droids, which are just minions, medical droids are rivals, protocol droids, security droids, and then you have your random galactic oddities and fringe dwellers. Forsaken Jedi, nemesis. Gamorrean thugs, the pig-faced dudes that hang out with Jabba. You got your Ithorian storytellers, your Minox, your Twi'lek dancers, Wookiee gladiators, Yarkora treasure hunters, mid-sized Dianagas, captive rancors, Gundarks. And then we have an introductory adventure, which I will skip merrily past. See lots of nice guidance for the GM, what checks to roll, enemies, and then your index. And then we have your character sheet. So these are where you mark your ranks of your skill, soak, wound threshold and current wounds, strain threshold and current strain, defense for ranged and melee, your 6 characteristics, then all your skills, your combat skills, your knowledge skills, custom skills, your weapons, your XP that you spent and your available XP. And then you have an additional sheet where you can put your talents, special abilities, motivations, obligations, equipment, and your crits and so forth. Then you've got a ship character sheet. So for a small ship, you'll just use fore and aft defenses. For scale 5 and up, you'll use all 4. And then you have silhouette, speed handling, armor, hull trauma, threshold and current, system strain, threshold and current, weapons, attachments, cargo hold, crew, passengers, consumables, hyperdrive, and sensor range. And then your base of operations. So this will be the place where your group hangs out, place to live or whatever. And there you go. That is Edge of the Empire, the first of the FFG Star Wars role-playing game series. Really fantastic stuff. I really can't praise this game enough. It's given me 2.5 years of gaming joy. I'm definitely looking forward to introducing it to other players as well. Just before we go, I'll give you a quick look at the lovely GM screen. Now, firstly, the Game Master packs for these games, they all come with an adventure as well. So here we have Debts to Pay. So it's a 32-page book, brand new adventure, and some rules and advice for GMs as well. So just a quick look at that. We've got some new droids and some battle maps and some new enemies and so forth. So that's pretty cool. And then we have our Game Master's screen, which is a 4-panel, very thick job. One of the panels just says the name of the game, which is a little bit lame, but at least it does cross over into the next panel where we've got a Mandalorian bounty hunter, we've got, a lightsaber wielding fringe Jedi, and we have our good friend, the Millennium Falcon, being chased by fire spray and, 4 TIE fighters. Okay. And then on the other side, you've got tons of useful tables for the aspiring GM. So you have your basic summary of the symbols that are on the dice and what the different dice are called, what they look like, spending advantages and triumphs in combat table, difficulty levels with examples, attack difficulties based on distance for ranged combat, ranged difficulty modifiers, spending threat and despair in combat, a full-on ranged weapon and melee weapon table, along with a list of all the qualities and how they're activated and what they do, critical injury table, which is all the way up to the end here. Action and maneuvers and encounters, armor and what it can do for you. And then we have finally our vehicle critical hit results here. A silhouette comparison, which can add to the difficulty of the attacking ship. Damage control difficulties and medical check difficulties. So these apply to vehicles and starships, and these apply to people. So it's pretty much everything you need to know during a typical session. And again, I'll point you in the description to the lovely summary of the FFG system based on Force and Destiny, released by the Alexandrian, which has been very, very useful. Yeah, make sure you get lots of these bad boys. I mean, I don't know why people complain about the specialty dice. I thought most RPGers love dice, and these are specially made for this awesome game. And I really do believe this game is awesome. I've played most of the Star Wars games that have existed, and I'll be going through the older ones as well, not just these guys as time goes on. But I just want to stress that I do think that this is my favorite Star Wars game. I think D6 is very, very close. It just has that immediacy that can sometimes be lost with this game. But I think this game has just so much crunch to dig into that it's just the right level for me, and it mixes with narrative play in a really interesting way, and it occupies an unusual niche where you have mechanical heft and narrative room to play in, and they work together surprisingly well. So yeah, that's Age of the Empire. I highly recommend that you get it. If you have any interest in Star Wars and any interest in RPGs, you should definitely check it out. The only downside is it can be hard to find in stock, but usually Age of the Empire and Age of Rebellion you can find. It's Force and Destiny that tends to go for higher prices in my experience, because people love being dorky space wizards. But being Boba Fett or Han or Chewie is also really cool. And if you need dice, then the starter set's probably your best bet. I think the individual packs sold out really quickly. So yeah, I hope that was helpful. I will be looking through the other books, but I won't be going through the mechanics every single time. I will try and keep things a bit tighter. Now that you know the basics behind everything, I'll show you what's different in Age of Rebellion. You know, the talent trees, the addition of things like bases and the different systems they have instead of obligation, like duty and morality in Force and Destiny. So I'll talk about the differences and show you, each book has different parts of the universe represented. So here we didn't have a lot of capital ships, for example. You'll see those in Age of Rebellion. So anyway, I think it is worth having all three books, and I'm also going to highlight my favorite supplements for the game. The sort of splat books that come for each line are great for player-facing stuff, but for me as a GM, there are particular books that I find really invaluable that are kind of reference books and also setting books that I find really useful. So I'll talk a little bit about those as well. But until next time, I hope you enjoy your May the 4th. I'm going to talk more about Star Wars for the rest of this month, and just at random times when I feel like it, because I have a lot of Star Wars stuff. So there's a lot of mileage in that. In the meantime, go check for Age of the Empire at your friendly local game store, or here in the UK, you can find it generally at places like Dungeonland, Leisure Games. They will have copies when they are available, which is not always, but if worst comes to worst, Age of the Empire and Age of Rebellion are reasonably affordable on eBay. And they are technically still in print, so you should be able to find new copies somewhere. But it's a game that's well worth it. It's survived more than 10 years for a reason, so do go check it out. Happy May the 4th. May the 4th be with you. Take care. Please hit like and subscribe on your way out. Donate to my Ko-fi if you want to help me maintain the insane pace of me buying RPGs that I've kept up to this point. And thanks for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the comments down below and in the next video as well. Take care, and bye-bye.